by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, are gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our contemplations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and meeting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. Madam Clerk, please do administer the oath to the Senator.
I, Nancy Charles, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of St. Lucia, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of St. Lucia. I do affirm.
Thank you, Clerk. And welcome, Senator Nancy Charles. Good morning to all, especially good morning, Senators. I have received the correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following motion and bill will pass in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Credit reporting, registration of supervised entities, anti-terrorism amendment, companies amendment, mutual assistance in criminal matters amendment, extradition amendment. I beg to announce that His Excellency the Governor General has been pleased to assent the following bills: Fisheries Amendment, Money Laundering Prevention Amendment, Money Services Business Amendment, Constitution of St. Lucia Amendment, Constitution of St. Lucia Amendment number 2, Suppression of Escalated Crime, Police Powers. Statements from Ministers, Parliamentary Secretaries. Honorable Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Leader of Government Business. Papers to be laid, Leader of Government Business. My apologies.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I proceed, I grant your leave to give a special welcome to our newly sworn-in Senator, Senator Charles, and look forward to her adding her bit, making a contribution to the debate today. So, welcome, Senator Charles. Madam President, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument number 27 of 2023, Fiscal Incentives, AMICI, AMICI, Italian Food Factory Limited Order. Statutory Instrument number 28 of 2023, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital or current expenditure, Building Public Health Resilience, Coronavirus Disease 2019 Response Project, Statutory Instrument number 29 of 2023, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. Statutory Instrument number 30 of 2023, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by St. Jude Hospital.
Bills. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Credit Reporting.
Credit Reporting.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of this bill. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move for the second reading, or I beg for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Credit Reporting. Madam President, just to contextualize the bill in question, or the bill before us, we have to recognize that the environment in which we operate as a developing island, I don't like to say small, because small is relative, but a developing country within a region that is constantly facing challenges, that we are part of a wider economic group, and being part of the OECS, the OCC, the ECCU, we sometimes sign on to certain agreements and certain partnerships that require that we take certain decisions. And sometimes we may have issues with them, and we have to sit and figure out which ones impact us and which ones we have to go back to. But at many times we have to try to remain compliant and to be relevant as far as what our other counterparts do. And so this bill, Madam President, I need us to recognize that it is necessary that we pass it, because being the largest economy in the ECCU, we are perhaps the only territory who has not signed on to it, and it may appear that we are holding back the rest of our counterparts in that regard. One of the reasons why we believe that it is necessary as well is that there was, previous to the existing period as we speak now, this bill had gone to the committee stage to consider minor changes. But then the bill died in the previous session of Parliament, and so it had to be brought back. And so, Madam President, we believe that now is the opportune time for us to be able to become compliant with the rest of our colleagues in the region. One of the issues that was raised is that the bill may have implications for companies, the credit rating of individuals, which is true. The access to the credit bureau would be a way that will help people to improve their credit rating. We also have to take into consideration the way in which we do transactions in this island, in this part of the world, the way we pay our bills, and certain factors that may not be even our fault, but can affect, as we say, our credit rating. And I'll just use an example for something that actually I relate to because it has happened to me. Every month we have our utilities bills to pay. I prefer to not name the utility company, yet I single out anyone. But there's a particular utility company, when I go to the post office to receive, or when the post office produces the regular bills, there's a particular one that is never there. So I would collect the others, and that particular bill is not at the utility company. And when I go, most times when I'm paying the others, that bill is not yet available. So what it does, if I'm not a disciplined consumer, and I know some of us, if we have a little something in our pockets, you go down to the city or you go online to pay, and that particular utility bill is not yet there. You will pay what is there, and believe me, Madam President, most of the time we have use for the money that we have in our pockets. And the average person who may not be as disciplined as some of us and say, look, I'm only going to put that money aside for bills, you might spend the money, and therefore in the following months you'll be in arrears, and that can affect your credit rating. It can give the impression that you have bad debt, or you don't honor your commitments. And so, Madam President, this is one of the concerns that can be raised in respect to that bill. But since I've mentioned it, I urge our St. Lucian folk, our brothers and sisters, that we should, even if that happens to us, if we have set aside $5 to pay our utilities bills, the bill has not arrived, use the money, leave it there, and yeah, put it somewhere so that when you go the following month, you're not found to be in arrears and you can't find the money. Just a little bit of advice I think all of us can appreciate. Madam President, it also allows for the ease of monitoring money laundering and terrorist financing. And later today, Madam President, we will be making some amendments to the anti-terrorism legislation. And so there is a connection between these operations, this bill, and other bills to come. So it is important, Madam President, and I will be extremely brief because many of the bills that are going to be presented today are interrelated. There's some connection, and I think they're also timely. So I think these amendments will put us in line with what the rest of the region is doing. We will not be, quote unquote, responsible for holding anyone back, and we'll be in full compliance, and hopefully it can help to bring us on par with our colleagues. So I present it, Madam President, to this Senate, hoping that we will give approval to its passing and achieve its objective. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that the credit reporting bill be read a second time. Senator Fede.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to welcome Senator Nancy Charles. This has been a very long journey of political advocacy and staunch debate. Welcome to the Senate. Madam President, I just want to beg your indulgence as I make a few comments, very brief comments on this bill. This is a bill that I'm very familiar with. We've had a lot of discussions back and forth in the previous cabinet, and some of the considerations that were contemplated on and debated on. A few were mentioned by the leader of government business. One is being a member of the ECCU Currency Union and the need for cooperation and the need for us to ensure that we're causing the ECCU to be working well. However, we had significant concerns, and which is why in our time, we felt that we needed more opportunity, more debate, more consultation with the people of St. Lucia, so that they can understand the ramifications of this rather interesting piece of legislation. This is going to affect their lives, Madam President, in very significant ways. And I think that not sufficient consultation was done to brief the people of St. Lucia so that they can understand by passing this bill here today that what we're effectively doing is that now they're going for a loan that utility companies, how they comply with those bills, whether they are on time with their water bills, whether they are on time with their electricity bills, whether they are paying courts on time if they have higher purchases, and whether they are paying other bills that they have on time. So this is coming at a time when it's already difficult for private individuals and small business people to get loans from our lending institutions. Extremely bureaucratic is the atmosphere that we're in. And this brings with it a whole host of challenges, a whole host of difficulties that the people of St. Lucia, I think, ought to understand a little better. I can't imagine or put in words the difficulty that small businesses are going to have. Because the real truth of the matter is that because of the economic challenges that we face, especially now with global inflation, people are juggling bills. People are caught up above their noses with bills to pay. And I'm not by any means professing or encouraging people to be delinquent. I'm just saying that that level of sensitivity must be felt, and that reality must be spoken about boldly and very bluntly, because what we're about to do is going to have untold damages on a lot of families and a lot of ordinary citizens in St. Lucia. So I am extremely concerned still, and I understand that the government is wanting to ensure that they don't hold back the pace of the legislation. This came from the ECCB. But we have to be careful that we're not importing G7 policies into a small island developing state. I mean, this is something that works in the United States, where the economy driven largely by credit. And so therefore, this has become necessary because it helps the financial industry in the US. It helps to make sure that the banks are protected in that way so that they can reclaim their monies. Other arguments here would suggest that, you know, someone who's very good at paying their loan would then say, well, why should I, another angle to this argument, why should I, a well-intended, a good paymaster, if you will, paying my bill on time, why should I have to inherit high or hefty interest rates that are going to come as a result because there are some bad people who are borrowing money, or there are some bad paymasters, if you will. That is a very, very sound argument, and that is certainly the reason why interest rates in the Caribbean generally have proven to be higher in some G7 economies. I don't like to say first world. All of us are first. So in the economies that we call the G7, the most industrialized countries of the world, they tend to have lower interest rates because the risk is lower to them. And so that's an argument. Some people who are paying their bills are going to say, well, why should I suffer because my neighbor is not paying his bill on time or paying his debts to the bank on time? That's a very valid argument to contend as well. But the most vulnerable demographic of the economy of our society is what the United Workers' Party previous administration was concerned about, hence our own little reluctance in order to pass the bill. And so we have to, I think, be a lot more careful. I think we have to be a lot more sensitive to the implications that this is going to have, notwithstanding that this is coming from the ECCB, notwithstanding the fact that we are trying to ensure that this bill is going to facilitate the advancement of the ECCCU credit situation a lot better. This is certainly going to help the banks. This is going to give the banks a lot more confidence. On the flip side, if you want to find a positive, to lend. Will it really? Because I think the banks are still going to they're still going to have very onerous and bureaucratic principles that they are going to impose on us, the citizens of the Caribbean, and indeed St. Lucia. So, very, very concerned still. There are aspects of the legislation that I'm concerned with. I look at, for example, if we look at Section 8, Part Roman numerals V, says that the bill contains provisions on the central bank supervisory powers. I'm just reading the explanatory note. And it goes on to say that the central bank is empowered to gather information, carry out inspections, and enter and search the premises of someone. So this is empowering the central bank in ways that doesn't exist right now. And I wish I had time to delve in some more into this, because clauses like these are of extreme concern to me. This is now making the information of people so public that we have to be extremely concerned about what this is opening up our society to, what it's opening up businesses to, what it's opening up private individuals to. When the credit bureaus are established, a question that looms large, will the credit bureaus have to share this information with the global credit bureau sector? Or is it now that the credit bureaus in the Caribbean are going to have the information that they have received from various customers? Will that information be kept at the ECCB? What are the safeguards that are now here to ensure that this doesn't go wider afield, that the information is not shared with other credit bureaus around the world? What are we exposing our people to is the questions that I have. So, I haven't heard anything from the explanation on the government side thus far, Madam President, that leaves me feeling comfortable that this bill is in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. I thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a few very brief comments on the bill. I recognize in starting off that this bill, like pretty much all the other bills on the order paper, are mandated by external factors more so than local interests. And that's something I understand is the reality of the world, and I'll make further comment on it on some of the other bills. But it's a little disconcerting and disheartening that we are being forced continually to enact legislation that may not, although seemingly in the best interest, or progressive interest I should say, may not in fact be in the best interest of St. Lucia and St. Lucians generally. As the leader of opposition business noted, this bill will in effect change the lives of all of us in St. Lucia, intended or unintended. We now have to adjust the way in which we conduct ourselves because, as the leader of government business noted, the mere fact of how you pay your bills, your utility bills, now become a consideration in your credit worthiness, how you pay your rent, how you pay your debts generally. Now, As a business person, I welcome that because too often you find that your accounts receivable are unrecoverable because persons can't be bothered to pay in a lot of cases, not because they don't have the resources. So there is some benefit that hopefully will come from that. But on the flip side of it, it means that, as again the leader of government business pointed out, through inadvertence, through overlooking, you could fall foul of the provisions of this bill and affect your credit rating. Now, I hope, and the way I understand this bill is supposed to work, it's supposed to enable the banks, particularly persons advancing credit, whether banks or non-banking institutions that advance credit, to be able to better assess their risks. And as a result of that, to be able to better offer the customers credit at reasonable rates and supposedly, increase borrowing in the country and facilitate development in that way. I'm hoping that that is what transpires in practice. Because oftentimes we put things in practice and the end users, recognizing that there are other ways of using it, use it to their own advantage and not necessarily the advantage of the consumers. Particularly my experience with living overseas at times, credit risks and credit assessments can pop up in ways that you don't expect. So I think the bill does envisage, for example, when you are renting, that your landlord has the capacity now to go and do background checks on you and decide whether they're going to rent to you or not. So there's a possibility that persons may not be able to get accommodation because they're not sufficiently creditworthy. It was an eye-opening experience to me to have to qualify for a bank account, for example. Most of us are used to being able to just go to the bank, you show up with your ID, you show up with your, well, now perhaps you need to have a job letter, but you fairly easy to open a bank account. It's not a situation where you actually have to qualify and the bank can tell you, no, we're not giving you a bank account because you're not sufficiently creditworthy. Notwithstanding the fact that all you're going to be doing at the bank account is putting your own money into the bank and taking it out from time to time. I'm hoping that there's not a situation where we begin to increase the unbanked in St. Lucia. We already have significant hurdles in terms of anti-money laundering requirements and what is necessary to open a bank account. This is adding another step now. So not only may you have to then prove your ID, your residence, your income, etc., you may now have to prove your creditworthiness to obtain a bank account. I'm hoping that's not going to be the case, but I know in some of the metropolitan countries that is in fact what happens. And so what services you get from the bank is determined by your creditworthiness. As a more general comment, again, going back to the issues of supranational bodies sort of imposing their will on St. Lucia, and I guess by extension the rest of the ECCU, I agree with the leader of opposition business. It is somewhat concerning that the central bank seems determined to arrogate to themselves as much power as possible. And reading through this bill, most of the functions, administering, the monitoring, the supervision of the credit bureau, although I understand that the idea will be that it will be one credit bureau to service the entire ECCU, will reside at the central bank, which means that as a local country, we have very little oversight over the operation of the credit bureau, what's happening with it, and we are putting our trust in a single regulator. My experience with that can be that the regulator's interests may not be that of the country, may not be that of St. Lucia. So strategically, there may be a mismatch there, and that's something we will have to pay attention to. I also notice, and perhaps leader of government business is something that we need to pay attention to, the amount of information that is going to be collected by the credit bureau is significant. It will represent almost every aspect of the life of an individual in St. Lucia. And so data protection becomes very important. I notice that some effort is made in the bill to prescribe some data protection requirements, but clearly there is a need for a comprehensive data protection act, and I would like to commend to the leader of government business that is something the government does look at. I know we do have a data protection act that we're bringing in to effect bit by bit, but the sad truth is that that act is already outdated, and we need to review and update that act to ensure that the privacy entitlements and rights of our citizens are respected, that the ability to access and correct incorrect information is made easy, because we have the provision in here, but sometimes, again, how things operate in practice, you need to make sure that the persons have easy access to the information to ensure that they can make the corrections where they are wrong, and ensuring that the only persons who have access to this information are persons who are legitimately entitled. We know that there are countries who make a living out of data attacks and ensuring that they can access data that are not necessarily stored within their borders. So we need to ensure that whatever credit bureau operates has the most robust systems in place to protect this information. As I point out, this is going to cover your employment history, your residence history, your payment histories. You can develop an entire picture of somebody from this information. And if this information is accessed illegally or corrupted in any way, the repercussions for individuals and the country as a whole could be dire. So this is something, I know there's some elements of here protection, for data protection in here, but we need to ensure that we have a robust Data Protection Act generally. And there are other aspects. As we continually legislate in these areas, more and more information is being required and requested from individuals. More and more individual privacy is being entered into, I don't want to say violated, but entered into. And we need to ensure that there is adequate protection for it. And for example, the right to be forgotten, if necessary, can be brought into our laws. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Tusa.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, fellow senators. I just want to make a quick intervention, Madam President, on the bill before us. The bill, in its own preamble, speaks to the objective. And it says the purpose of the bill is to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers, and to provide for a single space in the regulation of credit reporting. So, having gotten an understanding of the general purpose of the bill, it is for this reason that I stand here in support of that bill. Understanding, though, that with everything, especially things new, there will be perhaps gray areas and areas that require improvement. The bill gives a lot of, and it has been indicated before and also in the other chamber, that the bill gives a lot of authority to the central bank, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And then I have wondered a bit in terms of the trepidation that seems to have been voiced about the authority or the level of authority being given to the central bank when it comes to items to do with the credit bureau and the other items under the credit reporting bill. My question, though, is that, or comment, is that since the inception of the central bank, it had been established as the monetary authority of the island states, of which St. Lucia is included. And of course, one of the primary objectives of the central bank is to be able to maintain a level of stability of the currency and things related to the currency within the monetary union. And so I tend to beg to differ with the trepidation that seems to have been voiced in terms of their involvement, because they have been involved in the stability of the dollar and so many other financial decisions within the territories anyways. But of course, understanding, like I said, that with things new, you just really start adding issues and perhaps seeing things that you may not have seen previously that will come up as you put new legislation. In another life, I served on the board of a credit union for about 3 years. And of course, being in that position, having sat on the board, it means we also had responsibility for the review and oversight of loan applications. And of course, it would be loan applications the value of the largest bands of loans that could be issued within the credit union. And so, reflecting a bit on that, Madam President, and now bringing in this bill, I think that one of the things that it will help, because so often you sat down and you looked at the information before you, of course, having been privy to perhaps a loan officer, Madam President, presenting you with a debt-to-service ratio document to determine whether or not that individual is worthy, for lack of a better word, of receiving a loan. And so I see the credit bureau, the installation of a credit bureau, which is accounted for under this bill, as really an additional platform that financial institutions can use to make that very determination, but I think in perhaps a less subjective kind of way, with a bit more information that can give you a little bit more empowerment to make that type of decision. I think as well that, and I think Senator Lee mentioned it, in terms of accounts receivables, a lot of especially small, micro and medium enterprises are burdened and almost crippled to a certain extent with the level of accounts receivables that exist within these institutions. And so I think having that type of information that will help you evaluate the financial stability or the credit worthiness of an individual may also then give these institutions the ability to predetermine or determine the greater likelihood of an individual being able to repay monies that are unlended to them. And so it may then redound to a greater ability to collect on these loans. What I found as well as a member of the board reviewing these loans is that we find sometimes that the loans that would sometimes end up being delinquent would not necessarily be as a result of an individual being unable to pay, but rather a situation where they realize if there is a loophole that they can take advantage of, then repaying their loans just would not be a priority for them. But understanding now that these very behaviors will then determine your ability to lend from another institution, lend from the same institution, or to do a number of other things, I think that may end up being a deterrent for these quote-unquote delinquent individuals, but also an ability for the institution itself, especially for the financial institutions, to be able to protect themselves and guard themselves against that sort of thing, and so to be able to manage their account receivable a little better. Of course, on the flip side, there are the individuals who, like the leader of government business indicated, may be deemed uncredit-worthy for events that may be simply genuinely may just have slipped through the cracks, Madam President. For example, going to pay a utility bill that may not have already been issued, and you say, okay, you're going to set the money aside until it becomes available, but something that you may consider more pressing, like a medical emergency, may come up, and you may end up redirecting these monies in that direction, and that then will have an effect on your credit worthiness. But I think it also gives the economy and the government an opportunity to ensure that there are measures put in place to protect these people who may be considered a little more vulnerable when it comes to these types of situations. And I'm thinking, for example, if the financial institutions may then be at a position where they can control their accounts receivables, it means it should also give them the ability to manage their resources in a way, in a more productive manner. And so the question is then, what are the measures that are going to be put in place to ensure that these institutions, these financial institutions, the bank, looking at the banking association, the collaboration with them, the collaboration with other regulators such as the Financial Service Regulatory Authority, the FSRA, how could they then come in working with this piece of legislation to ensure that they put particular products or particular services in place to ensure that persons who perhaps would not have otherwise been able to benefit from some of the products that they offer, maybe in terms of lower interest rates, to allow these people better access and better ability to repay their loans. So, for example, I remember during the COVID period where we had a whole list of persons who, because they had either lost their jobs directly as a result of COVID-19, Madam President, or indirectly whereby a member of the household may have lost their job during that time, or they may have been on reduced pay, they would come in to ask for some sort of reprieve from the financial institutions. And then I'm sorry, but I am a cooperative person, believe in the credit union and cooperative system, and so I may be a little biased here. But I know that the credit unions are one type of financial institutions that work for their members. And so you're always encouraged to come in and sit with your credit union rep, sit with your loan officer, if in fact there is an issue with the repayment of your loan. And what we had found is that a lot of individuals would not have necessarily taken advantage of that, because you can come in, you have a given situation, and you can determine, well, your repayment is $50 a month. And if you can make a case, your loan officer would make a case to the credit committee and to the board to look at a reduction of your monthly pay to allow you to actually remain within operating in a legal way rather than becoming delinquent. And so I think that these institutions then have a responsibility to the persons which they serve to ensure that, given that they may be able to, they may have a little more resources in terms of collection and so on, that they put measures in place or products in place to service or to serve these other persons so as to protect them from falling into the cracks when it comes to the credit worthiness, Madam President. Madam President, I noted something while the leader of opposition business was making its presentation. And like the leader of government business, he indicated the length of time that this piece of legislation had been, or that bill had been in discussion. And the question, though, that just popped in my head whilst he was speaking is, whereas these things were determined, issues were determined, or weaknesses of the bill were pinpointed, in my mind, it should have been, or it ought to have been, that there should have been some sort of progressive, strategic plan of action to ensure that some of the things that were very well highlighted there should have been an attempt to correct them, or an attempt to strengthen, an attempt to put things in place, so that by the time we got to this point, it means that we would have already strengthened perhaps the institutions or the policies or the procedures in order to ensure that we then were able to become one of the states that were compliant in terms of signing off on this piece of legislation. And so again, I want to highlight that one of the things that this bill will do is to give the financial institutions more confidence in their lending, and then it should then trigger some internal changes in policies and procedures when it comes to lending, and also opening of accounts and so on. I noted that the independent senator, he used, I'm trying to remember the term that he used, whether some persons would now not even be able to have the ability to open accounts, because we understand that even the criteria now are a bit onerous. And so I think that then gives the ministry responsible for the banking, the banks, the financial institutions, to now have that level of consultation with them as to how we can make it more accessible to people. I mean, you hear people who go to the banks and the credit unions and they turn away not opening a bank account, Madam President, because it's just asking too much of them. And it's really funny, you know, that, like he indicated, You're coming to put your money into the bank. And I understand, yeah, there is the issue of ensuring that money laundering and so on are kept. But it's always amazing that some of these people are very genuinely hardworking people, sometimes with low-paying jobs, who just want to put themselves at a position where they know they're putting something aside, especially at their credit union, so that they can now capitalize on the little that they put. But the requirements are so onerous, it's so restrictive, and it means that some of them then turn back to the archaic, put your money under your pillow, or use it in a manner that may not necessarily change their life. And so I think as a country, as a community, we have a responsibility to ensure that we capture these people and put measures in place to protect them, because they are the most vulnerable amongst us. But I do believe that given the advantages of signing off on this piece of legislation, that it is a step in the right direction. But with everything else, these pieces of legislation definitely cannot stand alone. They need the other support systems and perhaps other pieces of legislation to ensure that they actually are able to materialize to their full potential. And so with this, I just want to reiterate my support for the bill, but looking forward to seeing these other supporting systems and supporting legislation to ensure that we can take full advantage of it, Madam President. I thank you.
Leader of Government, Senator Stanislaus.
Thank you, Madam President, and let me welcome my colleague, Senator Nancy Charles, to this sitting today. Like the leader of opposition business articulated earlier, Madam President, I am quite familiar with this bill. It's something which was discussed on a number of occasions, and many persons were of the opinion of the negative impacts of it to the St. Lucian people. Whilst I understand the leader of government business saying that we have our obligations to the ECCU and other organizations and governmental agreements and so on, but this, Madam President, is a life-changing bill. It's a monumental piece of legislation which I believe will have serious consequences for a lot of St. Lucians, if not all St. Lucians. There are pros, but I believe there are lots of cons to this bill. And a lot of those consequences, those cons, could lead to even further economic and social issues in the country, Madam President. Madam President, I think in the bill, they mentioned briefly of security, data protection, but I believe they need to articulate more and expound on the level of security for the data which is going to be collected by those credit bureaus. Because you know we have very sophisticated hackers out there who have been able to crack and break into big government departments, military organizations, and hack into data, credit card companies, and so on. And I think security, cyber security protection is very critical for those credit bureaus which are going to be established and have such critical information on probably every St. Lucian you could think of. I'm also concerned, Madam President, of the confidentiality of persons who are going to be working in those bureaus. And I think in section 12, part 2 of the bill, it speaks about restrictions on employment of certain persons. But I still believe that it doesn't go far enough, Madam President. It speaks of a credit bureau shall not employ any person who is an undischarged bankrupt, entered into a composition or scheme of arrangement with his or her creditor, was convicted of an offense involving fraud or dishonesty, or was removed from office under the provisions of this act and regulations. I still believe, Madam President, that you could employ somebody who passes the test and yet still you have a breach of confidentiality. I don't know if there is something whether they're going to do in-depth background checks of persons and maybe even polygraph some of those persons who are going to be working in those bureaus. Because these are persons who are going to have access to a lot of information. Information maybe persons, spouses don't even have or know about the other half. And if this information is leaked out there, if this information is sold for the highest bidder, this could have dire consequences. So I believe, Madam President, there must be some very stringent measures in place regarding confidentiality of persons who are going to be employed at those credit bureaus, Madam President. What's that? Madam President, I don't know if the leader of government business could tell us when he thinks that this legislation is going to come into force, and also how far back will the information, the credit information, be collected? Is it going to be going back 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years back to collect credit information on individuals, businesses, and so on? And I'm saying this, Madam President, because remember, during the height of the COVID pandemic, many, in fact, all St. Lucians were severely impacted. We had many persons who had moratoriums from the utility companies, from the banks. And are we going to collect all of this information during the height of the COVID and place it on the records, the records of individuals? Are we going to go back to another 5, 10, 15 years? These are concerns, Madam President, that I have with the bill, and I'm hoping that the leader of government business could enlighten us more on this, Madam President. Another concern I have, Madam President, this is going to significantly impact small businesses, individuals in getting a loan. Period. So the small bar owner in St. Lucia who may be defaulted on utilities, on hire purchase or whatever, may find it extremely difficult to access loans for expansion. The seamstress, the tailor, the taxi driver, the minibus operator, the baker, every single St. Lucian, the farmer, will be impacted by this legislation. And that is why I say this is life-changing, it is monumental, Madam President. And it is my fervent hope that the Ministry of Finance, maybe the Ministry of Commerce, and the ECCB, even before this legislation comes into effect, they can go on a national crusade of educating, informing the nation of this and the consequences of this bill, and some of the things which St. Lucian can start doing, preparing themselves to put themselves in a better position to access credit, to pay the bills on time and so on, and be able to access credit in the future. Because this is going to be life-changing. Another concern I have, Madam President, is I think we have some other bills there, probably linking to this bill, anti-money laundering and so on, anti-terrorist, etc. But my concern is that this bill may give way, Madam President, for the emergence of loan sharks out there. Not banks, but persons who may form small institutions where they give loan. Okay, you want a $5,000 loan, but your interest will have to be at 15%, 16%, 18%. Isn't that going to create some form of money laundering and all of that out there? I'm just, picturing what could emerge from this bill, Madam President. Because when people are not able to access monies from the banks, the credit unions and so on, because of their record, the credit score, the record, and they become desperate, they will grab at anything which is offered to them out there. So I'm saying that this legislation could also open the doors for money laundering and loan sharks who are going to take advantage of the ordinary man and woman out there. And we have to be very careful. We have to monitor those things. We have to be very vigilant, Madam President, because a lot of persons are going to suffer as a result of this bill, Madam President. But I understand we have our obligations. We have to fulfill our obligations. But I believe before this bill comes into force, we have to take weeks, months to educate St. Lucians throughout the length and breadth about the consequences of this bill, because everything is going to change, Madam President. Thank you very much.
Leader of Government Business. Beg your pardon. Senator Charles.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and let me say good morning to all, and thank you for your warm welcome. Madam President, I rise, of course, to share my concerns on the bill that is presented before us. In another life, in another capacity as a corporator as well, we did have some time to review this bill, to go over it and to look at the potential impacts on, as corporators, most of our clients or most of our members are small people, the little man on the street, etc. And so the potential impact of a credit bureau, as everyone has said, is life-changing, and it will be life-changing to everyone. So my question, the first question I ask myself is, who really is this for? Who is the main beneficiary of a credit bureau? And maybe I might say it may be myopic, but in my opinion, this is not for the benefit of the regular St. Lucian. This is, and don't get me wrong, I do understand why perhaps we need to implement certain legislations and why we need to go certain places and do certain progressive things. But this is not for the ordinary man on the street. This is not for the majority of St. Lucians who are hustling and bustling and struggling to make ends meet. This is primarily for the financial institutions, especially the big banks, that every single one of us here complain about on a daily basis. This is for them. This is so that they can have access to my credit information. They can have access to everything about me that will create a portfolio about me, so that when I come to the bank, already as it stands, it's already so difficult to access funding, to get a loan, to open a bank account, and to make life more difficult for me, but easier for them. That's what I see in this. Not for every single person. So when I listen to the debates prior, in terms of all the benefits and how this is going to be so good for St. Lucians, in my mind, not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. I think my colleague mentioned one, in terms of how will people, and I read the bill, I tried as much as possible to read through it again last evening, and I saw in there's a section on education, and the credit bureau will be mandated to ensure that it educates the people. Although it didn't go into substantive detail, but it is there. But the education of the masses on the impact of such a credit bureau is going to be critical, so that people can understand what a credit score is. What does a credit score mean for you? What is a good credit, if it's high or if it's low, what does it mean? What is the potential impact? And I'm saying that because I did serve on the board of a credit union. And one of the activities for us, as my colleague indicated, is to go over the loans perhaps of certain persons. And when you go over the loan portfolio of a member, you understand as an individual perhaps what this person is going through and what they've written there, so that you can say, okay, it is a risk for you, but then you will take the chance to be able to say, we will give that person that loan because this is what the person is doing. You know, you have faith in your persons. A credit bureau does not have a heart. It is very impersonal. It's about numbers, figures, etc. It doesn't care who Nancy Charles is or who so-and-so is, etc. All it looks at is the numbers, the figures, how do they tally and how do they add up. And so the potential impact for somebody when you go to your financial institution and then you're looking for finance, and then they say to you, well, your credit score is high or low, whichever it is, and it does not meet the criteria, and so you're not able to access that funding, then you throw your hands in the air and you say, well, what do you do? So at the end of the day, for the ordinary man to understand what this means is critical, and so my advice is to ensure that the Credit Bureau keeps to the mandate in there in educating people about credit reporting, what it means, what is a credit score, etc. So persons can also keep track of it themselves. I think to a certain extent that this is going to create a level of discipline maybe that we do not have as a society, which may be a good thing, because some other members have shared that as a society you hear the cries perhaps of some financial institutions in terms of our discipline, in terms of paying our debts, etc. So it's probably going to create that. But at the end of the day, one of the things that my colleague mentioned, and it's one of the things I wanted to ask, perhaps the leader of government business can tell us, and because I don't see it anywhere there, is the potential starting time of the data collection of the individual. And again, I do want to re-emphasize that during the pandemic, being on the board of a credit union, we saw so many members applying, and of course it was the same central bank who did give the directive to allow for banks to provide waivers and moratoriums in the initial stages 6 months, and then it was extended to a year. So you would have persons who would have entered in such an arrangement. And I want to read for you on the section 12, restrictions on employment of certain persons. And it says, section 12B, a credit bureau shall not employ any person who entered into a composition or scheme of arrangement with his or her creditor. So for me, this is twofold. The restriction that this places on employment of potential persons who may want to be or who may be hired by a credit bureau, I don't know, but I may suspect that a huge percentage of our population, and if this is what I think it means, maybe I have misunderstood what it means, but does it mean, or maybe I'm going to ask the question, does it mean that during the pandemic, I did go to my credit union and I perhaps lost my job or I got half pay, etc., and I entered into an arrangement with my creditor for my repayment? And so because I entered into an arrangement, a scheme of arrangement, then does it mean that I am ineligible to be employed by the credit bureau? And at the same time, if this is what it means, I'm seeking clarification. If this is what it means, if it is so restrictive on persons who are going to be employed with the credit bureau, can you imagine how restrictive it will be on an ordinary person in terms of your credit score if you would have entered into an arrangement with your creditor? And things happen, Madam President. We do understand, and you know that things happen. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine just 2 days ago that she'd been employed with a company who's been operating in St. Lucia for maybe about 30-something years. And this friend just recently went to the bank to get a mortgage so that she could build her house. And now she's been given 2 months' notice that this company is going to be shut down. So in the case of somebody like that who's been working there for over 20-something years, you just took a mortgage and now you're getting ready to build and you're going to lose your job, and then you find yourself in this situation. Automatically, you go in helter-skelter And persons like that, when they get to the point that they're perhaps not able to repay their loans in full, maybe the payment was $1,000, they go and they make an arrangement and say, okay, I'd like to reduce my payment, let's rearrange it, etc. How does that situation impact your credit score and your credit rating, and how does it impact you accessing credit or accessing money? Because all of us need money to survive. So these are important and critical questions that I would like to ask and seek clarification in terms of the Credit Bureau. Another important thing for me was, when I looked at it, I thought, who is going to pay for the credit report? So I go to my bank and I am seeking for financial assistance from my bank, and I am told that I need to get a credit report. So the Credit Bureau will be engaged, whether it be by me based on the legislation. I can engage for my credit report, or I can give consent to that financial institution to get a credit report on my behalf. But I don't think there's anywhere there, because it's not free, because the Credit Bureau has to be managed and maintained. The funding of the Credit Bureau would be by providing me a credit report, and I pay for that credit report so that they can pay for their staffs and their overheads, etc., etc. Because I read through this and I don't see anywhere that it's not funded by the central bank. So I am asking, who is going to pay for that credit report? And the reason I'm asking is, when again, maybe perhaps from again my prior life at the credit union, when persons come in and apply for a loan, already they already complaining about the rate of the loan, the interest, the documents they have to pay from the lawyers, etc., etc. In addition to that, you will now have a fee for a credit report. Again, there's nothing in there that gives maybe perhaps this is what the fee is going to be like. I suppose it will be based on operational costs, etc. I don't know if it's going to be expensive, Madam President, or if it's going to be cheap. I don't know if it's going to cost $100 per report or $500 per report. I don't know, and nobody knows. And so at the end of the day, the cost of getting a credit report becomes very important, because it is an additional fee or an additional cost that a potential person who goes to look for finance will now have to add to. Maybe if I'm trying to get $2,000, $3,000 from the bank or the institution, and now I have to add to that the cost of a credit report. And so there's nothing in there, no protection in there that gives an average. I suppose you can't, because you don't know what the operating cost is going to be. But then again, the protection to ensure that you do not have exorbitant costs for credit report. And so if I'm going to 2 or 3 financial institutions, that's 2 or 3 credit reports that I have to pay for, one for each of the institutions. I don't know how it works or how it's going to work, but I am assuming. So again, you need to look at all these things, and you need to ensure at the end of the day that persons understand that this is the potential impact of a credit bureau. One of my colleagues made mention of the data protection of that credit bureau. I did read in there that it spoke to data protection, etc. My concern, however, is the fines. So the fines range, it says, below, lower than $10,000 and no higher than $100,000 or $120,000. And so you have a range between that. My question is, how much value, or what is the value of my credit information, so that it is within a range of $10,000 and $100,000? The value of that information may very well be more than that. And so for me, I am a bit concerned that if there is a breach, especially in terms of your information being out there, etc., I am not too sure that the fine is sufficient enough as a deterrent to ensure that there is sufficient data protection within the agency.
Senator Charles, maybe you could point us to the clause that you're speaking to, at least we can follow if possible.
Perhaps it's all over, but maybe I will find it in a little while for you. But under, I think, every single one of them, it speaks to the penalties and the fines in there. Okay, but again, as I said, I think I am very concerned that it is not sufficient, especially as a deterrent, because if perhaps the Credit Bureau know that they can get away with a breach and it's only a fine between 10 and 100, we don't know what they're going to be charged, and they figure they can get away with that, then, you know, they may not make the extra effort to ensure that there is sufficient protection for the data of individuals within the Credit Bureau. Also, I did not see anything in there that prevents the data sharing or buying of data, and that is something my colleague mentioned as well. We must ensure, as we said, we are progressive, and perhaps we are implementing those type of legislation to ensure we keep with a progressive society. But with progress, there's also the challenges that come with those progress. And some of us may know there's something called identity theft, which is a big thing in the US and other places. Even in our small island state of St. Lucia, we get those, I'm sure we've heard the complaints of people who get those text messages that says they have some money and you've won some money, and if you send them your bank account, etc., they'll send you the money, whatever. All these scams that are going on. And a lot of these things are as a result of persons being able to access your data and your information. And in some countries, you have that issue of identity theft where people are able to steal your identity. Because when I look at the information that is in there, there's so much information that the Credit Bureau can collect on you that somebody, a potential person, may be able to get that information and create a data profile and be able to steal your identity and have that identity and be able to access perhaps your financing, your information, your money, etc., and so forth. So I did not see anything with reference to that in terms of the bill for that level of protection. And so again, I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition, if that is Leader of Government Business, sorry, if that is something that the government will consider. Although I did hear in one of the debates that there was no room, if I heard correctly, that there was no room for making changes, that the bill came as is, and because it is within the union, the currency union, that everybody would have had to implement the same legislation. But I stand corrected on that. There was just one more point. In terms of risk assessment, again, and I think the independent senator did make mention of that. That is a concern as well that I have with reference to the credit score or the credit reporting. I did not see anything that allows for when a risk assessment, obviously when a risk assessment is made, perhaps persons will be declared to be better potential persons than others, and will it qualify you for, with the financial institution, will it qualify you for different rates of interest based on your credit rating or your credit score? Now, I know for sure there's a little bit of that happens within the financial institutions, maybe because of your relationship or the nature or the amount of monies that you would be borrowing, you may qualify for a different interest rate. However, will your credit score or your credit report impact on the interest rate that you may be given or the accessing to the level of financing that you would be given? I think in light of these comments, Madam President, these were again some of the concerns that I had. I wish to reiterate something that my colleague mentioned. How far back will the data be collected? That is, for me, this is the most important aspect of this bill. This is the most critical thing that I would like to implore the government on behalf of the people of St. Lucia to ensure and to see as to, especially within the last 2 to 3 years because of COVID and the impact it had on persons and their personal finances, whether the information during the credit information during that period, whether we can waive it if it is going to form part of the reporting period, whether we can waive it, because if we do not, then if that information goes as is, and as I said, the credit bureau is impersonal. Doesn't care about your circumstances, if your father died and you had a death in the family or you lost your job, etc. All it cares about is that you're a bad payer, you didn't pay. And so if that period of time will be taken into consideration to be removed from the data gathering to ensure that every single St. Lucian has a fair chance of getting a credit score that is reflective of their circumstances as of now, then for me, everything else, maybe perhaps that is in the bill that I have concerns about, maybe, oh, you found the section with the fines? Okay, so I think it says general offenses and penalties, Madam President, section 50, number 2. It says where a person commits an offense under this act for which no penalty is specified or provided, the person is liable on summary conviction to a fine not less than $10,000 but not exceeding $100,000. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. So with these concerns in mind, Madam President, I wish to state I do understand the need for the Credit Bureau, but I do hope that the concerns that we have raised will be taken into consideration. I thank you very much.
Senator Jean.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise in support of the bill, recognizing that we are operating within an Eastern Caribbean Union space. Our currency is shared among all of the members of the Eastern Caribbean Central Union, and therefore some of the imperatives of the ECCU would have to be brought to bear on our country, St. Lucia. Madam President, I also see this bill as one of the requirements of development. As we progress, there is need for there to be regularization of a lot of things that are already happening. And so while I'm hearing of all of the disadvantages of this bill, I am seeing that there are advantages that would safeguard, first of all, the credit information providers, as well as the agencies or organizations that provide credit. Madam President, there's a high level of delinquency in our society, and I'm seeing that this bill is going to force every one of us to be disciplined in meeting our financial obligations. We must recognize Lani Mun ki mauvais paye, Madam President. Lani Mun, yo ni la han poche, mais yo pa vle paye bills yo. That's what is happening in our society. There are landlords who are languishing because there are tenants who are not paying. Lani mun ki pa pay cuts. Yo pa pay Lucilec. So I do not believe that this bill is for the one payment that was not made because the bill came late. I don't believe that this bill is covering the person who misses one bill due to a financial a medical situation or otherwise. I believe this reporting is going to look at trends, and that is what the financial institutions are already doing, monitoring trends. I mean, if you see somebody pay their bill on the 28th of the month one day, and on the 5th another day, and then goes back to the 27th or the 25th, you have to look at the trends of these repayments. And so it's not for the person, we could talk in as if we saw, you know, it's going to be so detrimental to the people of St. Lucia that if they do not pay one bill, on time, then their credit rating will go out of the door. I don't believe I've seen through that bill that this is what is going to be the case. Madam President, I also noted the penalties and what appears to be, what is being said that the penalties may not serve as a deterrent. But I believe, without being a lawyer, I believe in situations like these, if one is aggrieved, then they can also hold the credit bureau civilly liable for whatever breach that has occurred. So it's not just the fine. The law takes care of the fine, but you can file a civil suit against the credit bureau if you believe that you are so aggrieved. I will leave that to the learned attorneys. Monsieur avocat sans papier, so c'est comme ça moi way, Madam President. Madam President, the issues of cybersecurity are real, but they apply to every single organization. The utility companies are of threat of cybersecurity. The government of St. Lucia, the banks themselves. So the credit bureau's cybersecurity is also an issue, but we should not, blow it out of proportion. Cybersecurity is one issue that has to be spread across the board, and we need to look into it for all organizations. Confidentiality, Madam President, that applies to every single organization, everyone, the hotel industry. The waitresses and waiters that see in people business in the hotel are subject to confidentiality. So, again, putting on this whole thing that the credit bureau is going to be this devil that is going to, have people's data out in the open. I draw reference to Section 6 of the bill, Madam President, and I want to read. When evaluating an application for a license to operate or carry on business of a credit bureau in the currency union, the central bank shall take into account all relevant matters within its discretion, including A, the background, reputation, integrity, experience, and capacity of the proposed directors, managers, and other officers of the applicant, as evidenced by, among other things, the curriculum vitae and professional qualifications of the proposed directors, managers, and other officers of the applicant. That is there in the bill. Look at the high level of scrutiny. I am not sure that the ECCB at this time goes through that level of scrutiny for some of the financial institutions that are under them. We are already exposed, but look at the level of scrutiny that is going to be given to a credit bureau. They also need the business plan of the applicant, including a mechanism to integrate, gather, update, and validate the data, and the design of data collection for data subject information and flexibility in structuring the information in accordance with the Act and regulations. So, Madam President, it suggests, among other things, that there's going to be very strict monitoring and scrutiny of the credit bureau. This thing is not going to just be there like a little tea boutique at the side of the road and many information bureau sir. That is something that is going to be highly scrutinized. Now, Madam President, we must also see that bill in the context of any law, which means that it's going to be monitored and necessary amendments are going to be made based on what comes out of the implementation. So it's not cast in stone. I know this government that puts people first will repeal it if it is not working. So, Madam President, it is for us to see our glass half full, not half empty. we need to embrace the changes that are happening to us in the international environment, because St. Lucia is sitting there. We cannot be, like the leader of government business says, we are a developing state. And so we have to progress at the pace of development. There is a price to pay for it. So the last thing, Madam President, that I want to make reference to is this question of loan sharks and money laundering. Later today, we're going to be dealing with a lot of legislation that speaks to money laundering and anti-terrorism. And it appears that my government is really tightening. The only thing I am concerned about is, as we tighten, it might become much more difficult for us to do business in St. Lucia. And we have to juxtapose that with what is really an optimal process. There's need for some re-engineering of processes of financial institutions and other institutions to ensure that we are not just burdened with all sorts of requirements for documentation and all sorts of things. But, Madam President, there are loan sharks there already. The credit bureau ain't open yet, Madam President, but the sharks there. If a shark, this morning before I was leaving, before I left home, I got a call on my landline. Now, you know, c'est juste ça, mon pani landline, mon pa servi landline. So when your landline rings, you know, sometimes when it rings, Madam President, I don't even know where to find the phone. But when it rang and I answered, it was a call from an institution inviting me to come and take a loan. Right? Now, who knows where that person got my information? Who knows whether the person has information which suggests to them that I qualify for a loan? Who knows? A lot of information is already shared, Madam President, but this legislation puts it in proper structure so you can now target the sources where there are breaches and otherwise. Lastly, Madam President, I note in the legislation, which gives me great comfort, that there is a redress mechanism. There is redress through the Review Commission. There is further redress to the High Court and to the Court of Appeal. I suppose now, Madam President, it can go as far as the CCJ, and we don't have to pay pounds to the Privy Council. So this, to my mind, Madam President, gives the safeguard to the people of St. Lucia that the bill in its current form will be able to put your credit worthiness into proper perspective and help those who are unable to get to that level to come up to it. I totally agree that there is need for education as we go along. The institutions need to, and I would call on the credit unions and the other financial institutions to educate their members, let people know really what it is. But all in all, Madam President, I think it is a bill that is progressive. It is one that will safeguard us as St. Lucians and put us in line with the international environment. Thank you very much.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. We just listened to quite a bit of discussion on this bill. In fact, I didn't even anticipate that level and depth of discussion. So it suggests to us that we're paying attention to a number of issues. Nothing wrong with that. I just thought, Madam President, that in light of the discussion, there are a few observations that I made. and I would just wish to comment on. First of all, their arguments were raised along the lines of confidentiality. There were arguments raised along the lines of privacy and maintaining some kind of balance and protecting the interest of our citizens. I suspect in some way, even if it was not direct, but indirectly, suggestions made about how these amendments can be harmful to our business environment and small businesses, and a number of others. But Madam President, I just want to comment on a few of them. Some of these arguments are well placed, I must say, first of all. Some of these arguments are well placed. And the arguments about confidentiality, I think we are in the age of artificial intelligence, where information gathered about people are being used or can be used for more than the reasons that they were gathered. So you fill out a form thinking, you fill out a form for routine purposes, but people can use that information to decide to profile you and know a lot more about you. That might have been what happened to my colleague Senator Jean, so that they know probably her spending patterns, her preferences, and they know that she probably, in the month of March, is a good time to ask her for, she might be somebody who spends more money in March than in December. All of these things happen, and that happens not only in the business environment, but on social media and other areas. So the artificial intelligence thing is with us, and I think it's important that we have certain safeguards in place to guard against that. But I don't think we'll ever be in full control of that. It's almost as if once you don't want people to know your business, don't put your information anywhere. Madam President, there was an argument raised about the support for our local lending institutions, or our persons who have to access lending institutions, by two of our members here who have served on cooperatives. And I do respect that argument along the lines of interest in our local persons who need to borrow. But Madam President, I must tell you that even before we came to this House on the Senate with this bill, the government in which I serve had already put certain policies in place that are now going to help to address that. And let me just make reference to two of them. We express concern about how our smaller lending institutions like cooperatives and credit unions can be affected. But Madam President, I think in a previous debate, the former member for Force-Jacques-Souffret, who stepped out, Senator Stanislas, I remembered him being very pleased with the government stepping in for an intervention to assist the credit union that had a number of persons who had owed and couldn't pay, or to assist in getting the MOCA development out of the way. That was an intervention that I recall where this government decided, you know what, let us step in and give that small lending or small financial lending institution some support. And Madam President, it tells you about the foresight and the thinking of this government. That is the government that we serve in. A government that is conscious of those types of what we call the bigger fish in the ocean taking advantage or having the advantage over the smaller economies. And so we have to have measures in place to buffer and protect our small businesses and our smaller entities. Madam President, there was also an argument raised about along the same lines of small business. I think it is also important when a country can provide its citizens with options. You see, when you have to be dealing with those lending institutions and those types of bills where you do not have full control over what happens externally, you have some control about what happens internally. And I want to bring into focus, Madam President, to counteract what was described as the loan sharks. I think that term was used, the loan sharks. I think Senator Charles introduced the term. So if I may, or Senator Stanislas, may I just borrow the term? Yes, I agree that the loan sharks have been around, and they're not going away. They're looking for opportunities. As my colleague comes back in, I just want to let him know, I just borrowed the term loan sharks from him. Madam President, yes, it's true that they have been there and they're not going away. But here is what this government is doing. To be able to give our citizens options where they do not have to be subjected to the loan sharks. I will give 2 examples of initiatives that this government has already put in place. And they asked about how are we going to address that. Here's how we're going to address that. Last week Thursday, or last week Friday was it, I attended the launch of the Small, Medium and Micro Enterprise Facility, the SMME, from the Ministry of Commerce. Madam President, that is an example of an initiative that makes it possible for St. Lucians, the average St. Lucians, and I will speak to that in a minute, that the opposition has certainly found their voice of empathy for. These people have the option of accessing finance, lines of finance, not only in terms of loans, but in terms of grants. $10 million have been put aside for that particular initiative. 70% grant funding, 30% loan funding. So the average St. Lucian small business person, or the average St. Lucian who is afraid of the loan sharks, so in that case will probably be the sardines or the tuna. We're afraid of the loan sharks. Here is an alternative, a viable alternative that this person now has to go to so that they do not have to be a victim of this. And therefore, we know the reality, and so we are providing the option. Another example, Madam President, is the youth economy. The youth economy that was launched previously, where people, young people particularly, who have business ideas, can now access finance, can access support, technical support, and finance to be able to get going. And again, they will not have to be subjected to this. So my point here, Madam President, is that understanding the environment in which we operate, understanding that some of these external factors will put pressure on us as a country to enact legislation and to basically fall in line. We have to, but we have to also protect the interest of our people. And to protect the interest of our people, we have put in place alternative measures that can give them a choice, somewhere that they can access financing, somewhere that they can get some assistance. And I'm very happy that in the foresight of this government allowed us to have these initiatives. And there are others to come. There are others to come, but we'll get to that at another time, to be able to cushion that effect. Madam President, finally, I want to remind the Senate that there was a point that was raised by, I think it was Senator Charles, where she highlighted a number of shortcomings of the bill, and a lot of them were technical and specific. But there is no way that we will be able to practically and realistically take the legislation and amend it in such a way that it will be the ideal for our locals. That is what we want to do. That is what would be the ideal. But in the real world, quote unquote, it doesn't really work that way. But we can make a decision as a government to come back. That's why you have a government, to come back and say, look, you know what? These 2 clauses have become an issue and we want to revisit them. We can do that. While we have to conform, we're a sovereign state. We can come back and we can make amendments. And so I appreciate the issues that were raised. I think many of them were genuine. But I want to let the Senate know that we don't operate with a high hand. We believe that while we have a legislation to enact, while we have to conform to international expectations, we have a duty and a responsibility to protect the interests of our people. And that is why some of those initiatives are taken. I must remind Senator Stanislas that I made mention of the MOCA initiative, where we were in the parliament recently to help protect the interests of the people in his part of the country. And that is an initiative where the government is providing support for our smaller lending agencies to be able to survive. Somebody made the suggestion that this thing is for the bigger banks and them. I don't want to comment on that. Maybe that might be a way to look at it. But if we cannot influence the behavior of the big boys, we can protect the interests of our smaller people by giving them options and giving them support to be able to survive. Because you don't want to go and pick a war with anybody that you don't have the tools to fight. But you can, instead of going and pick a war, you can protect the interests of those under your care and those you can protect. And that is the approach we have to take. Let's not go and pick fights, but let's protect the interests of those we are duty-bound to protect. So, Madam President, just and finally, I want to give the opposition a bit of credit for showing at this point and finding their voice of empathy. I call it that this morning. You know, it's okay. It's okay. There are times when certain circumstances allow you time to reflect and say, you know what, maybe I need to put it that way this time. So I heard a lot being mentioned about the more vulnerable people. I heard terms of concern, particularly from the leader of government, opposition business. Concern, vulnerable, consultation. These words, these utterances are becoming part of the vocabulary, the lexicon, the newly found lexicon of our Majesty's opposition. And Madam President, I have no issues with that. I just would like to encourage all of us to have that same mindset. And if one of these days they find their way back to government, that they will continue, they will not throw away that lexicon, that it will remain with them. If it had to take 15-2 for it to happen, so be it. But I believe that it is something that I want to encourage the opposition to continue to do, and to be able to look St. Lucians in the eye without any guilt in their conscience, that it is something that we all must value. So on that note, Madam President, I thank all the members for their contribution and look forward to the passing of these amendments in the legislation. I thank you.
Senators, the question is that the credit reporting bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguard for data protection for customers of credit providers, to provide for a single space in the regulation of credit reporting and for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 2, Part 2, Clause 3.
Administration.
Part 2, Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 3, Clauses 4 to 16.
Licensing of credit bureaus.
Part 3, Clauses 4 to 16 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 4, Clauses 17 to 32.
Credit reporting.
Part 4, Clauses 17 to 32 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, Clauses 33 to 39.
Supervision by the central bank.
Part 5, Clauses 33 to 39 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 6, Clause 40.
Civil liability.
Part 6, Clause 40 stands part of the bill. Part 7, Clauses 41 to 44.
Credit Reporting Review Commission.
Part 7, Clause 41 to 44 stands part of the bill. Part 8, Clauses 45 to 46.
Appeals.
Part 8, Clause 45 to 46 stands part of the bill. Part 9, Clauses 47 to 57.
Miscellaneous provisions.
Part 9, Clause 47 to 57 stands part of the bill. Schedule 1.
Public registries.
Schedule 1 stands part of the bill. Schedule 2.
Constitution, operations and procedures of the Credit Reporting Review Commission.
Schedule 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title and commencement.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the credit reporting bill went through committee stage without amendments to clauses. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the credit reporting bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Credit Reporting Act 2023.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I wish to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Registration of Supervised Entities.
Registration of Supervised Entities.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to move for second reading a bill shortly entitled Registration of Supervised Entities. Madam President, like many other pieces of legislation that we are going to be presenting today, this bill is really to provide for the registration of specified persons or entities engaged in business activity. Essentially, to be in compliance with international financial expectations or international financial services requirements. One of the reasons why we have to ensure that we do, and this may have been an issue of discussion some years ago, is to ensure that we remain in compliance. One of the consequences has been blacklisting or grey listing or whatever listing that can be a consequence of not being in compliance with some of those regulations. Nobody wants that to happen. I think we recall one time it happened for the first time. We would not want to be in that position again. Unlike many of the other amendments and legislative changes that are going to be brought before the Senate today, this bill is very similar. And so we need to ensure that this is done. It speaks to issues of money laundering and all these other issues that can get in the way of prudent financial management and operation, and that this bill actually speaks to that. So I will not be going into a whole long discussion on it. I believe that it is straightforward and the objective is very clear. So I ask for the approval of the Senate to allow for this amendment.
Senators, the question is that the registration of supervised entities bill be read a second time. Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a brief comment on the bill that is being proposed. Madam President, what I call the financial imperialism of the small states of the Caribbean continues. You know, in my short time as being a parliamentarian in the lower house and now as part of this upper house, it is very, very concerning every time to come to implement legislation imposed on external forces. This is related to the Anti-Money Laundering Act. If you look at some of the clauses here, you would see that for example, if you look at the definition of what is additional business, it takes you straight back to the Anti-Money Laundering Act of St. Lucia, and it has a whole list of businesses from real estate to car dealerships to casinos and a whole range of accountants, even lawyers are there too. So the list is very, very long. But what I'm saying though, Madam President, when we look at the background of the anti-money laundering legislation, it says that this was to meet international best practice by the Financial Action Task Force. Who are they? Who are the members? Whose philosophies, whose interests do they represent? You know, Madam President, the OECD and the EU are guilty of overreaching into the sovereign and the sovereignty of small countries in the Caribbean. And this is getting so out of hand that every time they say to you, you need to amend this, whether you agree or not, it's forced upon you. And so this aggravates me, gets me angry at times. And you wonder how democratic the world really is. I remember in the cabinet where I served that it had gotten so bad where people were talking about policy loans that the World Bank and the IMF were negotiating, but then these loans came with a certain level of condition. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not for good governance. I'm not saying that I'm not all for extra scrutiny, for us to make sure that we put the adequate framework in our countries well so that we can run our countries well, so that we can beat back money laundering, so that we can ensure that all of these dark and ill financial practices that we can mitigate against them and eventually extinguish them altogether. But I think that this goes too far sometimes. Why should the OECD make the financial rules of the world and not a body where big countries and small countries have an equal voice to suggest and determine what the rules are going to be? I don't subscribe to the philosophy, for example, of tax havens, right? I subscribe to the philosophy that a country should be able to peg its taxes however it sees fit. Look at what has happened to our IBC business. Look at what has happened to a lot of the advantages that the smaller countries that are able to have low tax jurisdictions, how they have been able to gain that competitive advantage. If you study the history of trade, Madam President, and you look at the discussion that they've been having in the international fora, the smaller countries of the world have been encouraged to get out of industry and agriculture and sectors that required there to be a mass production. They were told that they couldn't compete if globalization was going to be that new dispensation of the world order. And so they got into industries like tourism, some financial services, only now to be struck with constant legislative overreach like these, again and again and again. And you know, I will keep being a very staunch advocate for these issues because I think that they are wrong. I mean, if you ask the leader of government business whether he agrees with the amendments or the bill that is being proposed here, there are some amendments that are coming up later that are all towards this whole global effort to fight money laundering. I'm all for it, fine. But let us all make the rules together. Let us sit together as an international body that we have equal representation. It should not be driven by the EU. It should not be driven by the OECD, where 20 or 24 of the world's richest countries get together around the table and decides for all of us what the financial rules are. And this is effectively what we do when we come to our own parliament and we say, well, we haven't got a choice. Let us agree with what it is. No, we have to continue to advocate for an equal voice on these matters. And I'm very serious about that, Madam President. We cannot just cower to these blacklists because, you know, we're being bullied by a country bigger than us. No, we have to now fight back. The Caribbean must fight back. We must take a regional stance, and we must say to them, look, let us make the rules together. If you want to fight money laundering, fine. As did the case when, you know, our countries, all the countries of the world got together and they said, well, we will agree to a minimum corporate tax rate for the world. That's fine. But at least there was discussion. At least big countries and small countries, the ministers of finance, they met, they discussed these issues. But you can't just be sending legislative changes that you recommend because, you know, it raises a very serious question as well. You want to ask whether the intent is really to clean up money laundering or whether it is to annihilate the financial services sectors or the related services sectors of the countries of the Caribbean. It raises that very, very, very important question. So, Madam President, whenever these bills or bills that resembles the one that we are going to vote on, because the ayes always have it, you always have to ask yourself, whose interest? Who's pushing this? What is this for? Do we even understand this? Do we even agree with what's happening? So, we must continue to sound our voices, and we must continue to show leadership in the Caribbean to corral the forces of all of the small countries of the world for us to beat back this kind of position. Thank you.
Senator Charles.
Madam President, I really did not intend to speak on the bill, but two things jumped out at me that I thought perhaps I should bring to the attention of the public. When I looked at the registration of supervised entities bill, and I decided to look at what other business activity, that jumped out at me as to what other business activity meant. And so in the notes, it sent me to the, let me get it. It sent me to the Anti-Money Laundering Act, and it gave a list of other business activities, Part B. And these are some of the entities that are the other business activities. And so some of them are real estate businesses. I know for sure we have quite a few of them here in St. Lucia. Small ones, big ones. Car dealerships, small ones, big ones. Something that jumped out at me was jewelry business. So perhaps all the little people who are selling their gold and silver jewelry stores, I'm not talking about the Colombian emeralds, perhaps that's what they meant, but the potential impact would be those persons with these little jewelry stores around the corner, etc. Attorneys at law, accountants, but also not-profit companies and not-profit organizations. And so when I looked at it, and I understand and I am in support, of course, of this legislation, but I thought that under Section 4, requirement for registration, Section 2 says, a person engaged in other business activity prior to the commencement of this act shall, within 6 months of the commencement of this act, register with the authority. And the first thing that jumped at me is the unfortunate thing about our society. I don't think, and I think perhaps members here may agree, that the majority of the population really follows what happens in Parliament, what legislations are being enacted, etc., and how it impacts them. It's always when they go to conduct business, then they tell them you have to do that, and then you have the complaint about why I have to do this and why I have to do that, and nobody pays attention to what is happening. And so for me, the list was very exhaustive, but I just picked out those few people, and I'm thinking, are these people aware of this legislation that is being enacted? And because they are already engaged in that type of business activity, the Act says that if they are engaged in this activity prior to the commencement, so if this comes into effect, Madam President, perhaps next week or the next 2 weeks, these persons would now have a 6-month period to register with the authority. Obviously, you cannot say because I didn't know, etc., but then if they do not, then they would have been in contravention of this act, etc. I'm asking what type, in addition to the fact that we are perhaps in Parliament, and as I suggested, majority of persons may not necessarily be following, what type of engagement will be done, consultation, a word we were told that perhaps the opposition has now found, but what type of engagement and consultation, education will be taking place to ensure, especially some of those smaller businesses who may not be paying attention as they should to what is happening, in terms of them knowing that they need to register their business with the authority to ensure that they are in compliance with this act. So I think we need to do a lot of engagement, a lot of education, a lot of reaching out. I'm not too sure who will be responsible. Perhaps the leader of government business can advise who would be responsible for that, but I think those persons need to be aware, because they only have a short time frame, which is 6 months, in ensuring that they can register with the authority. The second thing that jumped out for me, Madam President, was the fact that it says the purpose of the bill is to require a person who carries on a certain class of business activity to register with the Financial Intelligence Authority to provide for greater supervision and monitoring of business activities that present a risk for money laundering and other criminal conduct. So in my opinion, the authority wants to ensure that they are monitoring those type of businesses to ensure that they are not participating in activities that they should not and that they do not present a risk. However, the concern for me is under section 7, where it says registration fee and issue of certificate of registration. So you want to monitor my business as a requirement and ensure that I am not participating in activities that I should not be and that I do not present a potential risk. But the authority is now going to charge me a fee for me to register with them so that they can monitor me and monitor my activity. Does not say what the fee is. And so every time I see fee, certain things jump out at me. I have to make it known that it is a concern. What is the fee? How much is it? How much money do those small businesses will now have to pay out to the authority to ensure that they are registered? But not only that, it calls for, under section 8, renewal of registration on an annual basis. And every year you go back to register, you now have to pay the prescribed registration fee under section 7.1. So it's money, money, money. As a business person, and as I'm hearing from business persons out there, things are hard, the economy is tight, nothing is running, and every year we now have to go and pay a registration fee to the authority to be monitored, and we have to pay it annually so that we can remain, I suppose, in compliance. These are my concerns, Madam President. I think that perhaps the leader of government business should take that into consideration and advise, but again, I do have a serious concern about the level of engagement and information sharing that is going to take place to ensure that those small businesses would remain in compliance and keep to the 6-month period that they need to register. I thank you.
Senator Lee.
Madam President, before I start, allow me to correct an omission on my part when I first got up to speak, which was to welcome Senator Charles to the Senate chamber. Welcome. I note her contributions thus far, and I look forward to her further contributions as we go along. Madam President, I rise with great reluctance to support this bill. I had indicated when I spoke on the first bill my disappointment, I guess maybe the best word, for the position in which we find ourselves, where we are compelled pretty much to enact these pieces of legislation. And I note the lack of enthusiasm with which the leader of government business presented this particular bill, because I understand his position. We are back to the wall. We have no real choice but to enact these pieces of legislation. But that being said, Madam President, what occurred to me, in fact, during the presentation of in the previous bill, is what is the cost of these pieces of legislation? And I mean that metaphorically as well as literally. Metaphorically, as the leader of opposition business pointed out, every time we enact these pieces of legislation, we are chipping away at our own sovereignty. We are handing over to external parties the ability to dictate to us what our legislative regime should be. We are limiting our options in terms of economic development. We are limiting our choices in terms of what industries we can go into. And it's somewhat ironic when I looked, and I was engaged with one of my colleagues earlier on, somewhat jokingly, but also very seriously, about the fact that when you compare the risk of money laundering within our rather small economies to the economies in Europe, we're not even in the same sentence, the same book. much less the same conversation. And this morning I pulled up several articles detailing the level of money laundering that occurs within just the UK, for example, and have occurred even this year, despite the supposedly much stronger and stricter regulations that apply to these European countries. But the actual fact is that they impose these restrictions on us, but it doesn't apply to them. And again, I looked at an Oxfam report which was looking at the most harmful tax regimes, and they were making the point that for whatever reason, Europe has excluded themselves from the tax regimes, despite the fact that the most harmful tax regimes, the top 5, are either based in Europe or based in European territories, countries that they have direct control over. Yet still, we are the ones who are having to enact the legislation and pay the economic price that comes from having to, in essence, as the leader of the opposition business pointed out, cut the legs from under the industries that we have now tried to develop to diversify away from tourism and other extractive industries. As much as we may not like, and I agree, we're not supporting money laundering or corruption or any of those sorts of negative activities, but the fact is the international financial and international tax regimes at least enable us to derive some direct benefit, monies that stayed locally. Too many of our industries involve monies that just pass through and leave. But we were able to, in most of those situations, to develop local expertise and to develop local businesses that were able to develop and grow based on those. So what is the cost to us of essentially killing the industries that we had developed to help diversify our economies away from primary productive sectors and tourism-based sectors? I also look at what is the actual cost to us in terms of businesses that are affected by these new pieces of legislation. I will be one of these companies or one of these entities that is required to be registered under this act. It means I now have to put in place proper, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but there's a cost to it. Putting in place proper surveillance systems to properly analyze our dealings with our clients, to monitor those clients, to make the necessary reports when they have to be made. And that's not something I can do on an as-is needs basis. It has to be done all the time. There's a cost and there's a time to doing that. If I have to do it myself, it means that that's money that I cannot be making because I'm not dealing with a client in a productive manner. Otherwise, it means I now have to add a member of staff that I've not catered for. Am I able to pass these costs on to my clients? These are actual questions that we have to take into consideration when we are engaging with these international organizations that are forcing these things down our throats. We have had to create NAMLOC, a whole new bureaucracy to look at and administer the CFATF requirements, or the CFATF, I forget the name of it. They create these rather euphemistic sounding terms, but really and truly, they're imposing on us severe restrictions on what we can and can't do. And as I said, there are actual costs. One, we are taking away money from ourselves because we can no longer engage in profitable activities, and we are having to engage and expend additional funds because we're having to put in new bureaucracies, reporting standards. When we have to do the country assessments, persons have to take almost a whole week out of their lives to sit and go through all the requirements and how we are meeting them, in St. Lucia. That's persons who are not going to be remunerated. That's time that they're taking away from their other productive activities to do these things. That's a cost to us. Additionally, Senator Charles made the comment as to, are the persons who are going to be affected by this knowledgeable? Has it been brought to their attention, the effect on them? And I must commend the FIA, who is the authority. They have reached out to the sectors. But again, as we tend to be in St. Lucia, some people respond, other persons don't. Persons get tied up in the fact that they're trying to earn a living and don't take time out to deal with these things. Which means one of two things has to happen. We don't engage them, and we run the risk of the blacklisting that occurs because we're not properly compliant, or it means additional resources have to be put into the FIA to go out to these persons, to sit with them, to educate them as to what this bill means, what they have to do to comply with it, what are the structures they have to put in place to comply with it, and to actually get them registered. So again, there's an additional cost in terms of time and actual money that has to be expended to make sure that this is done properly. I don't know that whether we've catered for it, whether the FIA has made a request for additional resources. I know they don't have the resources right now to go out to all the persons who would be affected by this bill to make sure that they get registered, to make sure they're fully educated and know what the impact of this bill is. So I don't know how that is going to play out in practice, and it is a concern because if it doesn't play out properly, it means we've been acting and legislating in vain, because we're still going to get blacklisted for not being fully compliant. Another thing which had occurred to me, I was reading through the Act, and I'm not clear what exactly is the consequence of non-registration. It requires that you be registered, but there's nothing in the Act, and the authority has, it's not a compulsory registration, so the authority has the discretion to register you or not to register you. What happens if they decide not to register you? What happens if for whatever reason I'm not, other than a fine, what happens if I don't register? Is it that I can no longer operate in that space? Is it that there will be then restrictions placed on me in some way or form? It's not clear to me. I looked at the Anti-Money Laundering, Money Laundering Prevention Act, and again, it was silent on this. So that's something I think that we need to address. Again, a general point, we've made so many amendments to these pieces of legislation that I think we need to do one or two things very, very quickly. We either need to do a revision to make sure that all the amendments are compiled, because it took me about half an hour to find the relevant sections that apply to today. And I have access to all of them, so I don't know what's going to happen to persons on the street who don't have ready access to the bill. So it's either we do a revision very quickly to make sure that we compile all the amendments that we've made, or we enact a new bill to comprehensively deal with these areas. But the constant piecemeal amendments make it almost impossible to follow the laws for the ordinary man on the street. And I think it's important to make sure, and I'll come to it when we deal with the Extradition Act, to ensure that persons are fully aware, because there are significant and severe consequences if you fail to comply with these pieces of legislation. And if you are not aware of them, just because of the way in which they are being enacted, it's very difficult for the ordinary person to keep track of it, especially if keeping track of the laws is not your affair. And as we are fond of saying, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So we need to make sure as much as possible we deal with this in a comprehensive manner to make it a little easier for the ordinary person to keep track of what their legal jeopardy is as relates to anti-money laundering. So with that, as I indicated, with great reluctance, I support the bill because I understand the position in which we find ourselves. But I would like to commend the approach that was suggested by the leader of opposition business, that at some stage we're going to have to say enough is enough. We're going to have to, in conjunction with all the other small island states, get together and start to push back against the OECD, the EU, and FATF, because they keep moving the goalpost. Every time we comply, it suddenly becomes a whole new set of conditions that we have to comply in. And the unfair thing, and the unfortunate thing, is that in a number of cases, they themselves don't adhere to these restrictions, these conditions on these requirements, and their territories don't adhere to them either. So with that, Madam President, as I said, I very reluctantly, because I understand our situation, support the bill.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I think I want to start, maybe I should leave it for last. There was something that was mentioned by the last speaker that sort of just did it for me. In fact, I was about to make that suggestion going forward, but I will repeat it at the end of this short rebuttal. Madam President, this amendment, and I think my body language was properly read. Notice I wasn't very enthusiastic in the presentation, and we have to be honest. You know, there are some things as a developing country we know we have to do, but if we had a choice, we wouldn't do. Yeah. but it's necessary, and so we have to be disciplined, we have to be responsible, and adhere to some of those regulations. But as I did mention in my previous presentation, let us take control of the things that we can control. Let us take responsibility for the things that we can do. And again, in this discussion, I am getting the impression from the opposition, particularly, that they are the advocates for the less fortunate, for those who will be, this pious. It's interesting, Madam President. I've never seen, are we in Lent? Is that it? Okay. I've never seen that posture so prevalent. And I want to take it with a grain of salt and say, I just hope that, this posture, because it is interesting that I'm hearing advocate for the less fortunate and fairness and equal representation and collective. You just get that very pious and empathetic posture. But Madam President, at this point, I want to just juggle a little bit of the memory of my colleagues and say to them, I agree that as a country, we can't just swallow everything that the external environment throws at us. And I think the leader of opposition business made a suggestion that I heard was echoed by the independent senator, that there has to be a point as a nation, as a country, as a sovereign state, that we have to stop allowing people to chip away at our sovereignty. Yes, these were the exact words he used. We have to have some way of standing up. But let me just bring to the attention of the Senate a situation, and I'll explain why I'll bring it up. Madam President, one of the ways in which we can achieve that particular objective of being able to stand up to the bigger boy, so to speak, is by collective decision making, by getting together as a region. The voice of many, the contribution and the voice of, when we get together, the numbers matter. We have the OECS. We've been able to achieve certain things by getting together as an OECS. We have CARICOM. These are regional, if you can call it, bodies or entities that give us a little more strength. And there are certain things that we've been able to achieve because we get together as a region. If we had learned that in football, we might have been able to have won a World Cup, because West Indies cricket taught us that. When the region came together, we were able to conquer the very best in the world. But we have not done the same in other sports. We want to be on our own, and everybody wants to be his own great hero. But maybe there's a lesson in that, as a region, what we can achieve. So I'm just saying, Madam President, perhaps the independent senators' final point on having a collective approach to it will give us a little bit more strength and hope in being able to stand up and say, what? Enough is enough. You're throwing too many things down our throat, and we have to be able to say no. We will not have a very good chance of saying no if we stand alone. Our best chance is to be collective. But Madam President, here is the example I wanted to draw. Some time ago, when I was on this side of the house, of the chamber, a very good friend of the leader of opposition business, somebody he knows very well and sometimes tries to mimic and behave exactly like when he comes here. When CARICOM took a position on the Lima group, when there was this crisis in Venezuela, and you had this movement by a certain president of the United States to basically interfere in the business of our neighbor who has been very kind to us. CARICOM, not St. Lucia, CARICOM, as a region, took a position that they will not support the Lima group. But you know what happened, Madam President? And I'm applying the principle of collective approach. His then Prime Minister took a trip with 3 others in the region to, I think, a place called Mar-a-Lago, to meet with the then US President, who treated them like little children. You. and basically, undermine the responsible collective decision that CARICOM had made. And I say so, Madam President, because I'm referring to this opposition, who now believes that it is not okay for us to let people just talk down to us. But what was happening then? You had someone interfering in the diplomatic relations of those of us in the region with a friend. And CARICOM, not St. Lucia, CARICOM decided that we're not getting involved in that. But you know what? One individual coming from our small island felt that he had to go and join, persons on the outside of CARICOM and do his own thing. And I don't know if we're not, that sent a message about us and the implications of that kind of action. So while I believe that we cannot allow these things to continue to happen, we must have some respect for the idea of collective decision making. And when we are part of a wider region and we have opportunities to get together, we must not behave as if we want to go on our own frolic and do whatever we want. And when it is convenient, we are pious and we are advocates of standing up, and maybe we should do it collectively. Let us be consistent. Finally, Madam President, Mr. Deputy President, Leader of Government Business did make
Mr. Deputy President, I just want to raise in a point of order
Just now, hold on.
the member.
Hold on.
Yes, sir. The member is misleading.
Hold on. Let me acknowledge you first.
Yeah.
Let me acknowledge you first. Yeah. So, Senator Fede, go ahead.
So, St. Lucia was not the only CARICOM
Just now, what is your point of order?
Misleading the House and misrepresenting the facts as it relates to what he's saying. And I'm very sorry for interrupting your presentation.
Mr. Deputy President, I rise on a point of order.
Just now, let him finish his point of order first, because I haven't.
That's a point of clarification. That's not a point of order.
I haven't heard what his point of order is as yet.
You are misleading the House. The member is misleading.
Hold on. Okay, yes. And you were saying he's misleading the House.
Yeah.
Why?
So, factually, St. Lucia was not the only CARICOM member that's part of the Lima Group. Guyana was also part of the Lima Group. And the issues that we didn't go to have a meeting with President Trump, to have President Trump speak down to St. Lucia. That is a grave misrepresentation of the facts. Our government took a decisive position about the elections in Venezuela at the time. We had concerns about the validity and the legitimacy of the elections, and we are entitled to that as a sovereign country. So if your administration has a different posture, then say so. But please do not mislead the House in such a manner. Thank you, Mr. President.
You say anything that's different from what the Leader of Government Business said. So proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I know, the Ometikako de war. There are some things I have not even said that were being said. Mr. Deputy President, Mr. Deputy, I was simply making the point that if you believe that as a collective we can get things done, let us be true to it. And when the collective makes a decision, they take a policy position, they take a decision about something, don't be one of those who sidetracks and join 3 other nations and go and do your own business. That's what I'm saying. And that is exactly what was done by his then Prime Minister. And there's no way he can escape. The videos are there, the tapes are there, the news showed it. It was there for all of us to see. We saw the gesturing of the US President referring to our Prime Minister as you. I saw it. So let's leave that alone, because I want to make another point, Madam President, before we close. Mr. Deputy, the Leader of Government Business said that the ayes always have it. The opposition business. Now, it's a kind of an assumption we make about Parliament generally, because you have a majority and a minority. But I want to again, you see, having served in opposition teaches us a lot. And for me, it was probably a blessing that I served in opposition before I served in government. So I learned certain things that now that I'm in government, I will not do. And we should not do. But maybe for my colleague, it was the other way around. Mr. Deputy President, he did make a point about the eyes have it, to suggest that, you know, there's never going to be an opportunity for the minority, so to speak, to be able to have the way. But may I remind him that I sat in this chair where Senator Stanislas was. One day, about 6 years ago, thereabout, where the government was unable to pass a bill. A bill was defeated. The ayes did not have it on that day. So it has happened in this chamber where the ayes did not have it. And when we have the collective will, and we know something is wrong in this country, I have the confidence that we as a collective, as a legislature, can stop it. And we didn't have to go in the streets and misbehave. We didn't have to do anything, you know, that was not civil. We came to this chamber and we stopped it. So the ayes don't always have it. And there are times, I agree, we must say enough is enough. But let us be consistent, and when there is opportunity as a collective to make a decision to stop something that is oppressive, that is not good for us, that we stick with the team and don't go on our own frolic and come back a few years later and be the advocates for the minority. It's convenient, but I have not forgotten what went down before. So, Madam President, I appreciate, Mr. Deputy, I appreciate some of the issues that were raised, and engaging, by way of engaging, I must remind the Senate that this bill was circulated, was shared with the relevant stakeholders prior to it being debated here for their feedback. And I think that going forward, our government will always do its very best to do exactly that and ensure that before we come to this chamber, that legislation that needs to be amended or passed is shared with those who need to, or the relevant stakeholders, as we say, for the input, so that we make the best decisions going forward. I thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Senators, the question is that the Registration of Supervised Entities Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as that are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion, say no. The ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for the registration of specified persons engaged in other business activity which pose a risk in relation to money laundering and other criminal conduct for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 forms part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Administration of this act.
Clause 3 forms part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Requirement for registration.
Clause 4 forms part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 5.
Application for registration.
Clause 5 forms part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 6.
Grant and refusal of application for registration.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 7.
Registration fee and issue of certificate of registration.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 8.
Renewal of registration.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 9.
Suspension of registration.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 10.
Revocation of registration.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 11.
Deregistration and refusal to deregister.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 12.
Register of supervised entities.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 13.
Notice of change of a director or senior manager.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 14.
Notice of change of a beneficial owner.
Clause 14 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 15.
Notice of a material change in information required for registration.
Clause 15 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 16.
False and misleading information.
Clause 16 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 17.
Appeals.
Clause 17 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 18.
Regulations.
Clause 18 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Registration of Supervised Entities Bill went through committee stage without amendment. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the Registration of Supervised Entities Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Registration of Supervised Entities Act 2023.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Anti-terrorism Amendment.
Anti-terrorism amendment.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable Senators, the question is that Standing Order 49-2 be suspended in order to allow this Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Anti-terrorism Amendment. Mr. Deputy President, this bill attracts quite a lot of interest and attention, and while it is along the lines of previous bills that have been passed in this chamber, and even those to be passed subsequently, it calls for a certain level of cooperation, a certain level of vigilance, between not only that are related only to the country, in this case St. Lucia, but whichever other entities or jurisdictions that we would be partnering with or would cooperate with in order to deal with some of the expectations that the international community and our regional counterparts have of us in terms of dealing with what we refer to as terrorist activity. Mr. Deputy President, it will put us in good standing with the international community, and it calls for the, let us say, obedience to, or the responding to one of the recommendations of the report of the Financial Action Task Force, what we call the FATF, which really expects that countries do conform, if you want, for a better word, or cooperate. And so the amendments that we are providing, or we are seeking to make, will in some ways speak to the issues of freezing of assets of certain entities. It will also speak to certain adjustments that have to be made by countries in dealing with suspected terrorism or suspicious activity. It will also have implications for our border control, surveillance, even for our issuing of our passports. And I did hear the Minister for Home Affairs make mention of the digitization process of our e-passports, working towards helping to minimize these issues. So in addition to the bill, there are other activities that the government currently engages in that is going to complement, or is already complementing what the bill seeks to achieve. And so I believe that in itself, it is not going to be the panacea for all of the issues that we may have. It is not going to give us a guarantee that we may not be faced with the challenges. And like it is with climate change, Mr. Deputy President, terrorism, we may not look at our country or our region even as one of the major guilty parties in financing of terrorist activity. You know, we're a little drop in the ocean. And like with climate change, we might be responsible for, what, less than 1% of the emissions, but we have to face the consequence that everybody else faces. We may be more affected by those who are causing the pollution. Similarly, those who are probably more involved or more likely to be engaged in terrorist financing activity, they have to you know, we as the smaller islands who may, I mean, really, to what extent do people really look to us to finance, with the size of our economy, the capacity of our banks and our financial agencies? But like it is with most of the other bills that we've passed today, we are called upon to take those measures. And so we have to look at it closely and ensure that our other practices, for example, the issuance of our passports, digitization of our systems, to be a little more, to have some more higher level of accountability and visibility, minimizing the possibility of these activities being associated with us. And so we seek to make those amendments, Mr. Deputy President, to be in compliance with the expectations of the FATF and the other agencies, regional and international, that seek to, put it in this way, ensure that terrorism financing and other related activities are not associated with us. So I put it to this chamber for consideration and for the approval. Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Senators, the question is that the Anti-terrorism Amendment Bill be read a second time. Senator Fede?
I wouldn't be very long, Mr. President. I wasn't going to speak on this one, but the leader of government business mentioned quite a few times in his presentation this whole issue of passports, and it sprung to mind our CIP program, and our evolution in St. Lucia and the Caribbean as CIP jurisdictions. And it does raise the question whether in the government's own dialogue with the international agencies, whether the fact that we're involving as CIP jurisdictions in St. Lucia and the Caribbean, whether there is indeed a link here between the need for us to tighten up the anti-terrorism space to ensure that wherever we're accepting applications from, that we have a very good visibility on those individuals, and whether there is concern about the countries that we're accepting applications from. Now, the CIP sector, while it's a revenue generating sector that has helped the fiscal situations of the countries in the Caribbean significantly. And when I was speaking earlier, I was referring to sectors like the CIP. The leader of government business would know very well of efforts being made. In fact, there was legislation piloted by a couple congressmen in the US Congress to impose sanctions on those countries that had implemented their CIP program. It hasn't been passed through the Congress or even debated, but certainly if you check online, you would see that there is legislation there, and there's been significant concerns in jurisdictions like the EU about the CIP programs emerging in the Caribbean. But that aside, question then becomes, how do we respond in light of the growing concern around the world to anti-terrorism? I remember that our administration took a position, for example, where we did not accept applications from Iranian nationals. I'm not quite sure whether this government has in fact resumed the applications for Iranian nationals. Is something I would like the leader of government business to give clarity to, because I think that would be, and then as well to ask and not to single out any specific country. A terrorist can come from any location, but what we want to do, we took and to answer your question, the reason wasn't because of terrorism. The reason was because there was increasing concern by the international financial industry about not being able to trace monies coming from Iran. And as a result, we took a position for the extra security of the passport of St. Lucia and its reputation to try to safeguard the integrity and reputation of our passports, that we took that position as it related to Iranian nationals. So please, if you can, leader of government business, give us some clarity as to whether we have now we've now resumed receiving applications from Iranian nationals. It struck me that this regime, with great reluctance and delay, took a very long time and was really the last CIP jurisdiction in the Caribbean to have say no to Russian and Belarusian applicants in light of our support for the West and our traditional allies in the whole effort for the Ukrainian war. And so that in itself, to me, is regretful that we took that long. My information is that there were some Russian applications that were in, and we were trying to get them through, and so we didn't want to block it. I think that if that is in fact through, what we need to do is ensure that we send a very strong signal and to support, send a very strong signal against countries that may, for example, impose on the territorial and sovereignty of another country, we have to send the signals very clearly. And I think it's regretful that it took us that long to actually took a decision on Belarusian and Russian applicants in our CIP program. We have to ask as well. Recently, we note that the CIP real estate program and the real estate offering was at 300,000, and now it has come down to 200,000. Now, that is without any, I didn't see a bill come to the House for debate. I'm suspecting that that was done under regulation. I suspect that the administration did not want or didn't find it fitting for there to be any parliamentary oversight. But what I remember clearly is that when the CIP real estate component of the program started out, it was passed by the then Kenny Anthony administration.
Deputy, I stand on a point of order. With great reluctance,
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you. With great reluctance, I stood. I think the member is attempting to mislead the House with the argument that he has now taken. When he started with the passports issuance, I think that it was in some way connected to the bill, but now he's going into a discussion about CIP and investment in along a line that is not connected to passports, or along a line that is not connected with this particular bill. The value of investments of 300,000 and so on. That, in my view, Mr. Deputy President, has no relevance in this debate and is also misleading because it is now taking the discussion totally away from what this particular bill is about, which is terrorism finance, anti-terrorism, and specifically nothing to do with passports.
Thank you. I'm not sure that it's misleading necessarily, but I do agree that I don't see the relationship between what you are saying and the particular bill. The bill is dealing with anti-terrorism financing, which is a very limited and restricted thing. And since he's taken the point, I think you should confine yourself as much as possible to issues related to the bill.
So, if I can develop the argument with your permission, Mr. President. The reason why I'm raising the issues, because the arguments put forward by the then opposition while we were in government is that there was this argument put forward very strongly that the more oversight you have, then the better you're able to mitigate against issues of corruption, issues of terrorism, issues of applicants who may slip through the cracks that are not of good repute, unsavory characters, if you will. And so why I'm getting at the fact that the real estate program was reduced from 300,000 to 200,000. What I'm trying to say is that it didn't necessarily happen with the same parliamentary oversight that the Labour Party, whilst in opposition, were advocating for. Now that they are in government, I'm saying, whether that policy has gone through the window, because I have not seen the bill come to Parliament to reduce the specific legislation.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you now that I have your permission. Mr. Deputy President, I rise on a point of order. The member is basically violating Standing Order 37(1) of this House, of the Senate, in that he again is attempting to take the debate down a road of CIP, the value of CIP investments. The very this particular issue has to do with the value of investments and reducing the cost of the, what is it he calls it? The how much you spend. I think that this is woefully unrelated. The investment, this is an investment debate. He's taking it down. It has nothing to do with anti-terrorism, which has to do with surveillance. It has to do with of being in compliance with the issuance of passports or the issuance or the monitoring of financing. Mr. Deputy, it really is a debate now. He's taking it down the line of investment and the value of the investments, and that to me is irrelevant.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of Government. I did raise the issue with you that I didn't see how what you were saying was relevant to the bill. I would encourage you to move on. Thank you.
Very well, Mr. President. But the more oversight that we can have, the more that we can double check and cross check things, whether it's our CIP programs, whether it is applications for passports from the domestic level, whether it is extra protection, we need to have that oversight, and oversight is very much in relation to the bill that we're discussing now. So I understand that the leader of government business does not want to deal with the fact that, the procedure used for reducing the fees or the sum that someone can pay in our real estate program is used by just the regulation, right, and not coming to the Parliament as you suggested, is something that goes counter to what we're trying to do. And that is the point that we're establishing here now. I know it's a very uncomfortable issue for you to deal with, but Mr. President, I want to say to you that there must be oversight given the exposure that we are now placing our country under, especially with programs like the CIP. And so if you're going to have people applying from around the world, there's the Interpol check, there is your internal checks, and I know that one of the requirements is to go to the regional surveillance authority as well. But why not parliamentary oversight as well, to make sure that you are keeping in line with what the legislation says? Yeah.
Move along, please, because we've dealt with this already.
Yeah.
He's risen twice on that as a point of order.
I'm not talking about, I'm speaking about the bill.
Thank you.
Right? So therefore, Mr. President, like I've said to you, that I would need the opposition to answer whether the government to answer whether they have resumed accepting CIP applications from Iran. You raised the issue of passports and the digitalization of passports, so it really did jerk my memory to a very specific issue. So I thank you very much for that.
Senator Shaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. I rise in support of the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Act. I note, like I said earlier, that, and I think the leader of government business really put it succinctly and clearly, that while we are a very small island state, and what we do hardly has a grave effect on our external environment, we are not alone in the world, and so we are exposed to the vagaries of the international market, and as such have to protect ourselves from what is happening out there. Mr. Deputy President, what I see in the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Act is that there are stiffer penalties that are associated with any acts of terrorism. It now extends to a fine of $2 million or up to life in prison. And so that really demonstrates the seriousness that the government is taking in dealing with such acts if they occur. Mr. Deputy President, I'm also cognizant that terrorists are no small people, and they are around continuously creating strategic plans to get their avenues through in order for them to commit terrorism. And so they are likely to prey, P-R-E-Y, on unsuspecting victims. And so we're very cognizant that a lot of our nonprofit organizations, a lot of our small businesses, and the list of organizations that were dealt with under the Registration of Supervised Entities Act or Bill, these organizations are vulnerable to some of these terrorists from all over the region. I mean, we see some of it, I don't know if it's terrorism, but if you look at your spam, luckily for me, the emails go straight to spam. But if sometimes I just go through spam just to see whether there are genuine emails in there, and you're seeing so many emails inviting you to click on something to get money. Some grandfather left a big inheritance and they want to share it with me. We don't know where these things come from, and there are some scams that are sometimes very even difficult to decipher. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am a director of a nonprofit organization, and before we got incorporated, we had to meet with the Financial Intelligence Agency, and I was quite heartened at the advice which they gave. Because some of this, if you don't know about it, you would not even realize that you can fall victim to some of these scams. So my nonprofit organization goes out in search of donations. And one of the things that they said to us is, be careful of donors who are asking you, who would give you money and ask you to send back some of what they've given you. So, in other words, they can use your organization to wash your money. Put it through a washing machine. So they give the Bofamja Foundation a large sum of money. We put it in the bank here, and then they ask us to send back half of it. And that half goes somewhere else because it's now legitimized through the banking system. So a lot of these things are happening among unsuspecting organizations and individuals, and so you would want to make sure that there's a high level of vigilance and responsibility of such institutions so that we cannot fall prey to terrorism or to terrorists. One caution, however, is through all of this, that our banking system does not make their processes too onerous, because they have to look at everybody under a microscope. And so to me, there are some things that ought to show as, a friend just told me it's not a red flag, but a yellow flag, that we need to be aware of. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know there was a presentation apparently on the CIP and a connection between the CIP and this anti-terrorism bill. And I wonder why. And you know, sometimes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy President, you wonder whether some people during the period 2016 to 2021, during the 5 years, 1 month, and 20 days, whether they were living in a bubble Because right here in this house, in the House of Assembly, both in the lower house and in the upper house, amendments were made to the CIP Act to make it convenient for the administration at the time. Are we forgetting that, Mr. Deputy President? Are we forgetting? The CIP in its current construct goes through several levels of due diligence. And it has to be, it is in direct association with the Anti-Terrorism Act. Because the due diligence that is carried out, first of all, you have the agents who run preliminary checks on their clients. Then you have the highest level of due diligence conducted by not the RSS, but by the JRCC, and these checks are done. Then we have local law enforcement who go through another series of checks on these applicants. Anti-terrorism we're dealing with. Same, but I want to educate you. And then you have the board who has the total oversight.
Please, senators, address the chair, not each other, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, but it's for us to educate ourselves in here, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, there are full checks done by Interpol. Okay? And then it doesn't stop there. There are international agencies that ensure that these people are not placed on a watch list. In addition to that, Mr. Deputy President, the banking sector also ensures that your source of funds declarations are done, so that if there are large sums of monies coming into the banking sector, they would have to ensure, they would have to monitor the source and do their own due diligence. I recall in the dark, scary days, 2016, 2021, when St. Lucia was referred to, St. Lucia's program was referred to as the race to the bottom. But we forget. You know, it's like sometimes when I dream and by the time I wake up, I can't remember what I dreamt of. That
Mr. President, I'm sorry. I rise in the point of order. Yeah. I rise in the point of order, Mr. President. The senator is misleading the House and making blanket, wild allegations that she cannot prove. Mr. President, St. Lucia's program was never referred to as the cheapest. In fact, Mr. President, the facts will show that for the real estate program, St. Lucia on the same days that she's speaking about, 2016, 2011, was at 300,000. This administration, which she propels to the skies as the heavenly administration, has now placed you can buy a passport in St. Lucia now for 200,000 on the real estate. Check the facts before you come and speak nonsense in the House.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I object to this statement.
You withdraw. Thank you.
He needs to withdraw it with his mic on.
On the record.
One at a time, please.
Mr. President,
yes.
I apologize for the words of the use of the word nonsense, but the member needs to get her facts right.
Thank you. Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I want the member to know, Mr. Deputy President, Honorable Gaston Brown, Prime Minister for Antigua and Barbuda, in the dark, scary days, referred to our CIP program as the race to the bottom. Get facts. Mr. Deputy President, we are very close to lunch and I don't want to stand between lunch. Mr. Deputy President, can we get order?
Continue.
In the House, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, I am told that our CIP program today is one of the most unpopular. And you know why? Because of the high level of scrutiny of applicants. And I recalled when the CIP Act was originally created by the then Labour Party administration, there were requirements within the legislation that was supposed to cause applicants to be presented here to the House of Assembly. I don't know what has happened to these requirements. And so, Madam President, the people who have been clowns in the lower house, you know, and had to be admonished several times, you know, I just want Mr. Deputy President to lend my voice to this piece of legislation on anti-terrorism, recognizing that our small, unsuspecting organizations can be vulnerable and can be preyed upon by terrorists who can use these organizations to siphon funds into their wider network. And so I support this bill, and I trust that we implement the bill in a proper way in order that it does not become onerous to us as St. Lucians while we try to do business with financial institutions. Thank you very much.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Just a couple of observations. First of all, I knew I stood to present a bill on anti-terrorism, but it looked like there was a discussion by some, clearly coming in with the agenda of their leader, pretending that their presentation was provoked by my mention of passports. We know better that, you know, the script was there and it had to be read, and the script was to have a discussion on CIP. But I will not be so tempted, Mr. Deputy. I think a lot has been said on it. This is not what the purpose of this bill was. And just to remind the Senate that we had made several calls for the then government to come to the House to give reports on CIP as required by the legislation, to let us know how many passports were sold, to let us know who the persons were that were recipients, to let us know the amount of money, you know, and all of that. And I think that spicy discussion that was being triggered by the leader of opposition business, I will not be dragged into it, but instead just remind this Senate that the bill before us is really to help improve our level of oversight, our level of vigilance, the level of due diligence that we have to do to ensure that we are not in any way associated with terrorism financing. And so I put this to the Senate for its approval. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that the Anti-terrorism Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many senators, Senator Fede, I expect your attention, please. Thank you. As many as of contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Anti-Terrorism Act, Cap 3.16.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 3.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 5.
Amendment of Section 3A.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 6.
Amendment of Section 3B.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 7.
Amendment of Section 5.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 8.
Amendment of Section 6.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 9.
Amendment of Section 6A.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 10.
Amendment of Section 7.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 11.
Amendment of Section 8.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 12.
Amendment of Section 9.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 13.
Amendment of Section 10.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 14.
Amendment of Section 11.
Clause 14 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 15.
Amendment of Section 12.
Clause 15 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 16.
Amendment of Section 13.
Clause 16 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 17.
Amendment of Section 14.
Clause 17 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 18.
Amendment of Section 15.
Clause 18 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 19.
Amendment of Section 16.
Clause 19 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 20.
Amendment of Section 17.
Madam President, with respect to clause 20, 17.3, we propose to remove under section 3, the last sentence where it reads $750,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years, to replace the $750,000 with $2 million. $2 million, and the imprisonment that may extend to life.
Okay, senators, let's go through this. Page 14 of your document, 17.3, delete $750,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years, and replace that phrase with $2 million or to imprisonment for a term which may extend to life. Are we all there? Okay. Moving on.
Correct.
Clause 20 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 21.
Amendment of Section 18.
Clause 21 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 22.
Amendment of Section 19.
Clause 22 stands part of the bill. Clause 23.
Insertion of new Section 19A.
Are we there?
Madam President, under this clause, the insertion of 19A, and that is, sorry, the amendment of, we're going to be deleting the entire amendment on page 18, beginning section 23 until we get to the top of page 19.
The first paragraph of page 19.
Yes, the first paragraph. So we delete that entire section.
Okay, Senators, the entire, we on page 18, the part that reads amendment of section 23.
Yeah.
Everything there is deleted.
Just give me a minute. I need to consult with the attorney, madam. Yes, Madam President, I think we were a little ahead of time.
Ahead of time, yes.
In terms of the relevant clause. So when we get to that one, I will, yes.
Okay, so we
We
continue.
were actually speaking to clause 31, which we have not gone to.
Okay, so we're into clause 23.
Here. Okay. Yes.
Clause 23 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 24.
Insertion of new Section 20A.
Clause 24 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 25.
Amendment of Section 22B.
Clause 25 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 26.
Amendment of Section 22C.
Clause 26 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 27.
Amendment of Section 22F.
Clause 27 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 28.
Amendment of Section 22G.
Clause 28 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 29.
Amendment of Section 22H.
Clause 29 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 30.
Insertion of new sections 22I and 22J.
Clause 30 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 31.
Amendment of Section 23.
So, Madam President, we now have to make that amendment in deleting the entire, that specific section in its entirety, section 31. Section 23.
Subsection 23.
Under clause 31.
On page 18, Senators?
Yes.
Yeah. Section 23, the entire
I referred
section
to
is
previously.
deleted. Yeah.
Section 20.
And the implication, therefore, would be that the clauses thereafter, the numbering would have to be adjusted since 31 was deleted. So
2 becomes
32 now becomes
will now be 31 and 32, 33 becoming 32, 34 becoming 33, and so on.
okay. So we into clause 30, 31. Where we are close.
Remember, we have inspector to sergeant. We still have that under that.
Okay. So clause 30.
And when we get to clause 32, which will now be 31, we will have one more amendment.
Okay. So clause 31 now.
Okay. The new 31. The new 31.
So now, Madam President, so the clause 32 now becoming clause 31.
Right.
We have, we're proposing to the first 31A, the last few words. It now reads in subsection 1 by deleting the words not below the rank of inspector. That should be replaced with not below the rank of sergeant.
Okay, everybody on the same page, senators? Not below the rank of inspector is replaced with sergeant. Okay, so in clause 31, clause 31 stands part of the bill.
Okay. Aye.
Madam Clerk, are we on the right page?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, madam.
Clause 32,
Amendment of section 31.
clause 32 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 33,
Amendment of section 32.
clause 33 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 33 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Madam President, I have some clarification. The amendment of this section refers to the Principal Act. So although the section in the Amendment Act is 31, it amends section 31 of the Principal Act. So what is section 32, which we now change to 31?
Yes.
The heading is amendment of section 31, which is what its relation to the Principal Act. So I think our numbering may have been changed when we, so if we could just go back to our numbering of the headings. So 31 now amends 31 of the Principal Act.
We did.
Is that so?
No.
Yeah. I think we did some. Yeah, the titles remain the same, but the numbering of.
The numbering, yeah, the
Yes.
title remains. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Madam Clerk, are we moving with the titles?
Yeah.
We are going back to 31?
You want to go back to
Okay.
it?
31,
Amendment of, we did that already, amendment of section 23.
Yes, please.
31 is amendment of section 31.
No, I'm reading what's there. We correct here.
so is that what is the
We
title?
correct here. Yeah, but we correct here. Yeah, but
Yes.
we go in here.
So read out the
Amendment.
title,
We
so she
amended
will-
section 23 by deleting it. Yeah, so we amended, yeah. The old section. Come on.
If I understand the amendments that were made previously, what was 31 was removed. So the amendment of section 23 is no longer. Yeah, so
It's
we
no
moved
longer,
to
yeah.
32 becomes 31.
Yes.
And it remains amendment of section 31.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's correct.
Okay.
What's being what I'm reading is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We amendment, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Are we okay, senators? Do we need to?
It was amendment of section 31.
Yes.
Yeah, we will.
Okay. It was what was done in the House, so we are moving straight from there. Yes. Pardon? Clause 34.
Yeah. Amendment of section 41.
Clause 34 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1,
Yes, now
Short
34.
title.
34 would now be 33.
33.
So it's 33. Yeah.
Because we have moved up.
We moved.
one
Yeah, we moved
shelf.
all one up. Yeah.
So we have one clause less because of the deletion of one.
Yeah, but I cannot say it here because it's what's here. We were going by what's here.
It was done in
You
the
understand?
lower house.
Yes.
It was done in the lower house. So
Right.
we're going by what's here.
Okay.
That's what's before us. We are not making any changes.
We're not making any
We are
changes.
I know, but-
acknowledging that changes were made in the lower
We cannot
house.
renumber.
and
We
moving with
cannot
it.
renumber it.
These were
here.
not our changes.
Yeah, we cannot.
No, but aren't we then voting on the bill as amended by the lower house?
Yes, which is what
Right.
she's reading.
So it should be section 33, amendment of section 41, because that's the amendment that they made and has come up to us.
Yes.
Well, we could seek the advice of the
Yeah.
the deputy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're basically saying the same. Yeah, section 33 as amended by the lower house is what previously was section
34.
and so the amendment would be to section 41. So which is correct. So essentially it should be section 33 and the amendment is to section 41.
Yeah, that's fine.
The amendment to section 41.
Yeah.
So we move on to clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Anti-terrorism Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Anti-terrorism Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Anti-terrorism Amendment Act 2023.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Companies Amendment.
Companies Amendment.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of this bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill is very consistent with a number of the others that we passed today, in that it is seeking to be in compliance with the FATF, what we call the Financial Action Task Force recommendations from that report, and it basically is seeking to make sure that we're in compliance with that particular recommendation in the report. It may have some implications for the matter of ease of doing business in this country, but we would have to consider putting in mechanisms to complement this bill so as to cushion its impact, which whatever it may be. I would put this bill, as simple as it is, to the consideration of this Senate for its enactment.
Senators, the question is that the Companies Amendment Bill be read a second time. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, clearly we recognize the simplicity of it, and so I ask for its approval by the Senate.
Senators, the question is that the Companies Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Companies Act, Cap 13.01.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Amendment of Principal Act.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Insertion of new section 180A.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 5.
Amendment of section 515.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 6.
Amendment of section 519.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 7.
Insertion of new section 520A.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 8.
Amendment of section 532.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 9.
Substitution of section 534.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 10.
Amendment of section 536.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 11.
Amendment of section 537.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 12.
Amendment of section 538.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 13.
Amendment of section 539.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 14.
Amendment of section 540.
Clause 14 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 15.
Amendment of section 541.
Clause 15 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Companies Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Companies Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Companies Amendment Act 2023.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, reluctantly, I move I move that the Senate stand suspended until 3 p.m.
Senators, the question is that the sitting of the Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. I now put the question. As many who have that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. I think the ayes have it.
All right.
Eh bien, nous venons au bout de session aujourd'hui. Ce n'est pas au bout de session, un premier pas, puisqu'il y a un petit pause pour déjeuner. Je suppose nous allons dévier à 3 heures avec pour en déviant nous allons discuter. Ça c'est un lot bill mutual assistance in criminal matters. C'est un changement là avec ça il a créé extradition en amendement pour session en anglais. Let me say it in English. The House has just adjourned until 3 p.m. when they will discuss the other 2 remaining bills, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Amendment and the Extradition Amendment Bill. It has been very interesting in the House so far. We saw the appointment of temporary Senator Nancy Charles. That was the major activity there. And of course the bills that were discussed before the luncheon break was the credit reporting bill, registration of supervised entities, anti-terrorism amendment, and the companies amendment bill. Well, until 3 p.m. we will take you back to our studio, and of course we will resume at 3 p.m. So we invite you to join us then.